The doorbell rang at noon. I opened it to find my husband's daughter Ashley and her husband Derek dragging 4 massive suitcases. "Dad said we are moving in," Ashley announced, pushing past me. She shoved a crumpled chore list against my chest. Breakfast at 6 sharp. No greasy food. Fresh sheets weekly. Clean our bathroom nightly. Hand wash our work clothes, iron them, and never fold them. I looked at my husband David, expecting him to intervene. He just crossed his arms and looked away. I smiled. "Okay," I said softly. But at 8 the next morning, they realized they moved in with the wrong woman. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to entitled family members who completely underestimated your worth. I am Maya, 34 years old, and I work as a senior forensic accountant. My job involves tracing hidden assets and exposing financial fraud for multinational corporations. I spend days dismantling complex lies, which made my home life ironic. For years, I was the silent financial backbone of my marriage to David, a 45-year-old man who wanted everyone to believe he was a highly successful real estate investor. In reality, he was drowning in bad choices, but I played the supportive wife, quietly keeping us afloat. That compliance ended the moment Ashley and Derek decided my home was their personal free hotel. At 8 the next morning, I sat at the kitchen island in my tailored navy suit sipping black coffee. The house was quiet until angry footsteps pounded down the stairs. Ashley marched into the kitchen flushed with indignation, followed by her husband, Derek. Derek is a 26-year-old African-American man who introduces himself as a visionary tech founder. He wore a designer tracksuit that cost more than his car payment, looking thoroughly annoyed. "Where is the food?" Ashley demanded, slamming her hand onto the countertop. "My list specifically said, breakfast at 6 sharp. My silk blouse is completely wrinkled in the laundry room. What exactly is your problem?" Before I could even set my coffee mug down, David strolled into the kitchen, tightening the belt on his expensive robe. He glared at me, taking his daughter's side without a second of hesitation. "Maya, what is going on here?" David barked, using his authoritative tone that usually worked on his gullible clients. "My daughter and son-in-law are our guests. They have busy schedules today. I expect you to fulfill your wifely and motherly duties. You are embarrassing me in front of my family." I looked at the 3 of them standing united against me. They expected me to shrink, to apologize, to scramble toward the stove and start flipping pancakes like a frightened servant. Instead, I reached beside my laptop and picked up a thick manila folder. I slid it smoothly across the marble island until it stopped right in front of Ashley. "I am not a maid," I said, keeping my voice perfectly level. "But since you want to treat this house like a luxury service apartment, I have prepared your onboarding paperwork." Ashley snatched the folder and ripped it open. Her smug expression vanished instantly, replaced by utter confusion. "What is this?" she stammered. "It is an itemized invoice," I explained, taking another sip of my coffee. $5,000 for the security deposit. First and last month of rent at market value for the master guest suite. And a premium maid service fee of $200 per hour billed weekly. If you want your silk blouses hand-washed and your breakfast catered at dawn, you will need to set up a direct deposit to my account. I require the first payment by noon today." Derek scoffed loudly, leaning over to read the paper. "You have got to be kidding me. We are not paying you a dime. David told us we could stay here rent-free while we scale my startup." David snatched the invoice out of his daughter's hands, his face turning a dangerous shade of crimson. He tore the heavy paper right down the middle, throwing the pieces onto the floor. "You are out of your mind, Maya," he shouted, pointing a finger in my face. "You do not dictate the rules in my house. You are just a glorified bookkeeper. You sit in a cubicle counting beans all day while I am out there building a real estate empire. I am the man of this house, and I say my daughter stays for free." His blatant disrespect hung in the air. He truly believed his fabricated image of wealth gave him power over me. He genuinely thought my silence over the years meant I was weak. I did not raise my voice. I did not argue. I simply picked up my phone, opened my secure banking application, and navigated to the authorized users section. David watched me suspiciously, What are you doing? I selected the 3 premium credit cards he carried in his wallet, the ones he used to buy his designer clothes, pay for his expensive business lunches, and fund his illusion of success. With 3 quick taps, I froze every single account. I am adjusting my financial portfolio, I replied smoothly. Your supplemental cards are officially deactivated. You can fund your real estate empire and your daughter's room service with your own money from now on. David let out a harsh, mocking laugh, though panic briefly flashed in his eyes. You cannot do this. You cannot cut me off from my own money, and you absolutely cannot kick my family out of my house. I stood up, picked up my briefcase, and looked him dead in the eye. A cold, victorious smile spread across my face. Call the county clerk, David, I said softly. I bought out your defaulted mortgage 3 months ago. This is my house. David stood frozen, his mouth opening and closing as the reality of my words hit him. Instead of apologizing, he turned on his heel and slammed the kitchen door behind him. Ashley and Derek scurried out right after him, leaving their ridiculous chore list on the floor. I enjoyed the silence of my Saturday drinking coffee and reading financial reports, but I knew David would not surrender easily. His bruised ego demanded an audience to reassert his dominance. By noon on Sunday, my driveway was packed with cars. David orchestrated an impromptu family dinner, inviting his mother Eleanor, his 2 brothers, and their wives. He even invited my sister Rachel and her husband Marcus, likely hoping to isolate me by outnumbering my family. I walked downstairs at 4 to find 15 people crowded into my living room, complaining loudly about the lack of appetizers. David stood proudly by the fireplace, holding a glass of scotch, playing the role of the generous patriarch. Maya! There you are, David boomed, a strained smile plastered across his face. My family is starving. We are expecting that famous Sunday roast you always make. Get in the kitchen, darling. The women are waiting to help you set the table. I looked around the room. Eleanor glared at me from the sofa, tapping her manicured nails impatiently. Ashley sat beside her, whispering and snickering. They fully expected me to tie on an apron, bow my head, and play the obedient wife to save David from public embarrassment. I am not cooking today, David, I said, my voice echoing across the sudden silence of the room. I did not invite guests, I did not buy groceries, and I did not plan a menu. David's face flushed a deep red. What do you mean you are not cooking? I told my mother we were having a feast. You cannot do this to me in front of my family. Right on cue, the front doorbell chimed. I walked past my sputtering husband and opened the door. A delivery driver stood on the porch holding 2 large insulated bags from the most exclusive steakhouse in the city. I tipped the driver, brought the bags into the formal dining room, and began unpacking. The rich aroma of dry-aged ribeye, truffle mashed potatoes, and butter-roasted asparagus instantly filled the air. Stomachs rumbled audibly in the living room. David stepped forward, licking his lips, assuming I had ordered high-end catering for his gathering. That is more like it, he said, his chest puffing out again as he looked at his mother. See, Mother, Maya always takes care of us when it matters. I ignored him and pulled out exactly 2 ceramic plates, 2 sets of silver cutlery, and 2 massive portions of the steakhouse meal. I set one place for myself at the head of the long mahogany table. Marcus, I called out, making direct eye contact with my brother-in-law. I ordered your absolute favorite, medium rare with a peppercorn crust. Come grab a seat while it is hot. Marcus, a brilliant corporate lawyer, and the only person in this room who had always seen right through David's facade, let out a booming laugh. He unbuttoned his tailored suit jacket, strode past David's gaping brothers, and took the seat right next to me. You are an absolute lifesaver, Maya, Marcus said, unfolding his linen napkin. I am starving and this smells incredible. We began cutting into our perfectly cooked steaks, while 14 other people stood awkwardly in the dining room doorway, staring at us with empty hands and empty stomachs. The sheer audacity of it paralyzed them. They watched in stunned disbelief as Marcus and I enjoyed our premium meal. Eleanor finally broke the silence, her voice trembling with manufactured outrage. I have never seen such disgraceful behavior in my life. A good wife obeys her husband and hosts his family with grace. You should be on your knees thanking David for the luxurious life he has given you. Do you think we forgot how my successful son bailed you out of massive debt right before your wedding? You were nothing before he saved you from financial ruin. David puffed his chest out, looking incredibly smug, ready to ride his mother's aggressive defense to victory. I took a slow, deliberate bite of my steak, savoring the flavor. I did not need to defend myself because Marcus had already put his silver fork down on his plate. Eleanor, Marcus said smoothly, his deep voice commanding absolute attention in the room. I highly suggest you check your facts before you insult the woman who actually keeps a roof over your head. David did not bail Maya out of debt. Maya paid off David's $80,000 sports betting debt exactly 3 weeks before the wedding. I know this for a factual certainty because I am the attorney who drafted the non-disclosure agreement David begged me to make Maya sign. He needed her to sign it so you would not find out he secretly mortgaged your retirement condo to pay off his bookie. The dining room went dead silent. You could hear a pin drop on the hardwood floor. Eleanor turned slowly to look at David, her jaw hitting the floor in shock. David backed away, his face draining of all color until he looked sick. He stammered, holding his hands up defensively, desperately trying to formulate a lie that could save him. "Mom, I can explain." David choked out, thick beads of sweat forming on his brow. That was a long time ago. It was a complicated business investment that went wrong. Marcus picked up his crystal wine glass, swirling the red liquid casually. "Do not lie to your mother, David. We have the bank transfers and the receipts. Maya has been the financial savior of this entire family for 6 long years. If she wants to eat a ribeye while you stand there and starve, you say thank you and mind your business." While David was busy being brutally interrogated by his furious mother and shocked brothers, I felt a subtle rhythmic vibration against my leg. My smartphone was buzzing in my suit pocket. I slipped it out discreetly and glanced down at the glowing screen. It was an automated push notification from my advanced home security system. Motion detected in master home office. I had installed hidden motion-activated cameras in my personal spaces months ago when I first noticed David acting erratically with our shared finances. I tapped the notification immediately, opening the live high-definition video feed right there at the dinner table. The camera showed my private office upstairs. The heavy oak door was supposed to be securely locked. Standing right in the middle of the frame was Ashley. She had quietly slipped away upstairs while everyone else was completely distracted by the intense chaos unfolding in the dining room. I watched in real time as she knelt on the hardwood floor, shoved a decorative painting aside, and began aggressively wedging a sharp metal tool into the digital keypad of my personal wall safe. I stood up from the dining table, leaving my half-finished ribeye on the fine china. Marcus caught my eye, sensing the immediate shift in my demeanor. He subtly adjusted his posture, ready to intervene if necessary, but I just gave him a quick, reassuring shake of my head. I did not need a lawyer for this specific confrontation. I needed an audience. I walked quietly up the carpeted stairs, my heels silent against the plush fabric. The door to my home office stood wide open. Inside, Ashley had managed to bypass the digital lock by removing the plastic faceplate and triggering the manual override mechanism. She was currently pulling a heavy emerald green velvet box from the bottom shelf of the wall safe. That box contained the only physical things I had left of my late grandmother. It held antique diamond brooches, a solid gold heirloom watch, and a pearl necklace appraised at over $30,000. "Looking for something specific?" Ashley, I asked, leaning casually against the doorframe. She spun around, gasping sharply. The velvet box nearly slipped from her manicured hands and crashed onto the floor. For a split second, I saw genuine, unadulterated terror in her eyes. Then, like a switch flipping in a machine, the panic vanished, replaced instantly by an Oscar-worthy performance of victimhood. Tears welled in her eyes on command. She clutched the jewelry box tightly to her chest and let out a loud theatrical sob that was clearly designed to carry all the way down the stairs to the dining room. "Maya, why are you sneaking up on me like that?" she wailed, her voice trembling with manufactured fear. "I was just doing exactly what you asked me to do. Heavy footsteps pounded on the stairs. David practically sprinted down the hallway, bursting into the office with his fists clenched. He saw his precious daughter crying and holding the jewelry box, and he immediately turned his wrath on me. "What is going on up here?" David demanded, stepping between us like a shield. "Why is my daughter crying? She told me to come up here and get a necklace for her," Ashley sobbed, burying her face into her father's shoulder. "I was just trying to be helpful, and she cornered me and started accusing me of stealing." "Dad, she is trying to frame me." David glared at me, his chest heaving with righteous indignation. "You are sick, Maya. You invite my family over, you refuse to cook, you humiliate my mother, and now you are trying to frame my daughter for theft. You set her up. You probably left the safe unlocked on purpose just to trap her." I looked at my husband, the man I had supported, financed, and covered for during the last 6 years. He was so desperate to maintain his illusion of control that he would gladly watch me burn to protect his lying, entitled daughter. I did not raise my voice. I did not defend myself against the absurd accusation that I had asked my hostile stepdaughter to fetch my most prized possessions. I simply turned around and walked back toward the stairs. "Bring the box and come downstairs," I said over my shoulder. "Both of you. Now." David scoffed loudly. "We are not taking orders from you. If you do not walk down those stairs right now, the next people who walk up them will be wearing police uniforms," I replied evenly. That got their attention. I heard them shuffling behind me as I descended into the living room. The rest of the family had moved from the dining area and was now clustered awkwardly around the couches. Eleanor looked triumphant, clearly assuming David was finally putting me in my place. Marcus stood near the fireplace watching me closely, his arms crossed over his tailored suit. I walked straight over to the massive 85-inch smart television mounted above the mantel. I pulled out my phone, swiped down on the screen, and tapped the screen mirroring icon. The television beeped, the screen went black for a fraction of a second, and then a crystal-clear high-definition video filled the display. The entire living room gasped. The footage showed Ashley creeping into my office. It showed her shoving the heavy painting aside to reveal the safe. It showed her pulling a specialized lock-picking tension wrench and a hairpin from her pocket. "Ashley loves to brag about her unique hobbies on her social media accounts," I announced to the silent room. In fact, her most viral video is a tutorial on how to bypass basic keypad safes using a tension wrench and a standard hairpin. It is a neat party trick. It is also a felony when applied to someone else's property. On the massive screen, Ashley was clearly visible working the lock, her face twisted in intense concentration. The audio picked up the satisfying click of the manual override engaging. Then the video showed her reaching in and grabbing the velvet box, her face lighting up with pure, unadulterated greed. There was no audio of me asking her to fetch anything. There was only the undeniable footage of grand larceny in progress. David stared at the screen, his mouth hanging open. He looked at the television, then down at his daughter, who was suddenly trembling for real. Eleanor gripped the arm of the sofa, her face draining of color. The brothers who had been ready to cheer for my downfall were now staring at the floor, intensely uncomfortable. "You were going to pawn my grandmother's diamonds, Ashley," I said, my voice cutting through the heavy silence like a knife. "Did you really think I would not secure a safe containing $50,000 worth of heirlooms in a house full of people who openly resent me?" Ashley burst into frantic tears. She backed away from the television, looking wildly around the room for an escape route. "It is not what it looks like. I was just looking at them. I was going to put them back." "You are holding the box right now," Marcus pointed out casually from the corner. "That makes it possession of stolen property." The legal reality of Marcus's words hit the room hard. Ashley realized she was completely trapped. She looked at her father, pleading for him to fix this, but David was paralyzed. He could not gaslight his way out of a high-definition video playing on loop in front of his entire extended family. Suddenly, Derek shoved his way to the front of the group. He stepped directly between me and his crying wife, his face flushed with panic and unhinged desperation. He pointed a shaking finger at me. "Leave her alone," Derek shouted, his voice cracking under the intense pressure. "You do not understand what is happening. We did not want to steal your stupid jewelry. We only needed it to cover the margin call." The room went entirely still again. David snapped out of his daze, turning to his son-in-law with a deep, confused frown. "What margin call? What are you talking about, Derek?" Derek was hyperventilating now, the carefully constructed facade of the successful tech founder shattering into a million pieces. He looked at David, pure terror radiating from his eyes. "The crypto market crashed last night." Derek blurted out, his hands pulling frantically at his designer track jacket. The exchange issued an immediate margin call on the leveraged accounts. I had to inject liquidity or lose the entire position. "I already invested your retirement fund into my crypto project, David, and it is gone. All of it is gone." David let out a primal guttural sound that echoed off the high ceilings of the living room. He lunged forward, grabbing Derek by the collar of his overpriced designer track jacket, lifting the younger man almost completely off the hardwood floor. "My retirement fund!" David roared, his face turning an alarming shade of purple. $150,000. What do you mean it is gone?" Derek scrambled frantically, his manicured hands desperately clawing at David's thick wrists. "It was a guaranteed token launch, David. An algorithmic stablecoin pegged to decentralized assets. The developers promised a massive return on investment. I swear I thought it was a sure thing." Ashley screamed, dropping my grandmother's velvet jewelry box onto the rug and rushing forward to pull her father off her husband. Eleanor sat completely paralyzed on the sofa, clutching her pearl necklace as her entire world unraveled in front of her eyes. David's brothers, who had come expecting a lavish feast, shrank back against the dining room wall, entirely speechless. "You stole from me!" David bellowed, shaking Derek violently. "I trusted you. I believed in your tech company." "Let him go," I said. My voice was not loud, but it cut through the screaming and the physical struggle with absolute authority. David froze, panting heavily, and shoved Derek backward. Derek stumbled into the heavy glass coffee table, gasping for air and clutching his throat. I stepped forward, leaving Marcus standing near the television. I walked straight up to Derek and held out my hand. "Give me your phone and your laptop, now." Derek looked up at me, panic and sweat mixing on his pale face. "This is a private business matter, Maya. You do not understand decentralized finance or market fluctuations." "I am a senior forensic accountant," I replied, my tone dropping to a glacial chill. "I dismantle global money laundering operations for multinational conglomerates. I guarantee you I understand a basic crypto wallet. Open your exchange app and show me the transaction ledgers right now, or Marcus calls the police for grand larceny regarding my jewelry right this second." Derek visibly swallowed hard. He pulled his smartphone from his pocket, unlocked it with trembling fingers, and handed it to me. I did not even bother sitting down. I swiped through his exchange application, my eyes immediately recognizing the familiar layout of digital wallets and transfer logs. Derek had tried to obscure his tracks, routing the money through several obscure altcoins and decentralized mixers. It was a classic layering technique, one I had seen 100 times from amateur fraudsters trying to outsmart corporate auditors. The market crashed. Derek babbled desperately, trying to narrate my investigation and control the narrative. The liquidity pools dried up overnight. Everyone lost everything. It was a flash crash. I ignored him entirely, my fingers flying across the screen as I pulled up the Blockchain Explorer on his browser. The beauty of the blockchain is that it is a public, immutable ledger. Every single transaction leaves a permanent digital footprint if you know exactly how to follow the money. I traced the initial deposit of $150,000. It hit Derek's primary wallet exactly 3 weeks ago. From there, it was not invested into any token launch. It was not locked into a liquidity pool. It was not subjected to any market volatility whatsoever. I watched the digital breadcrumbs split into 3 equal increments. I tracked those increments through a tumbling service right into a cold storage wallet. I cross-referenced the wallet address with Derek's saved email drafts. It took me exactly 5 minutes to dismantle his entire lie. I locked the phone and looked up. The entire living room was watching me, holding their collective breath. The market did not crash. David Y. announced, keeping my eyes locked on Derek, watching the remaining color drain from his face. Your money was never invested in a guaranteed token launch. What are you talking about? David demanded, taking a heavy step toward me. He just said he lost it in the market. He is lying, I said cleanly and loudly so the entire family could hear. He siphoned your $150,000 directly into 3 offshore shell accounts housed in the Cayman Islands. Accounts that he personally owns and controls. He did not lose your money to a bad investment, David. He straight up scammed you. Ashley gasped loudly, stepping away from her husband, as if he had just caught fire. Derek, is that true? Did you steal my dad's money? Derek scrambled to his feet, holding his hands up in a pathetic, placating gesture. I was going to pay it back. I just needed temporary capital to fund a lifestyle marketing campaign for my startup. Investors need to see that you are already successful before they hand over venture capital. I had to look the part. David looked like he had been struck by lightning. His shoulders slumped, his chest caved in, and he collapsed heavily onto the leather sofa right next to his stunned mother. He buried his face in his hands, groaning in sheer agony. His entire fake empire built on lies and manipulation had just been completely obliterated by the son-in-law he had spent months bragging about to anyone who would listen. My retirement! David moaned, rocking back and forth on the expensive leather cushions. I am ruined. I have nothing left. I looked back down at the phone screen, my eyes drawn to the original fiat deposit record. I needed to see exactly where David had pulled the capital from. David had always claimed his retirement was locked in an untouchable corporate annuity. It never made sense that he could liquidate it so quickly to give to Derek. I tapped the transaction details, expanding the bank routing information for the incoming wire transfer. The numbers displayed on the screen were not from David's investment portfolio. They were from a local credit union. A bank I recognized perfectly. My heart went completely still. My forensic mind rapidly calculated dates, signatures, and legal documents. I slowly lowered the phone. I looked at David, who was still weeping into his hands on my couch. The anger inside me vanished, replaced by a cold, calculated clarity. David, I said, my voice cutting through his pathetic sobbing. He looked up, his eyes red and watery, expecting pity from the woman who had always fixed his mistakes. You did not have $150,000 in your retirement account, I said, stepping toward him. The routing number that funded Derek's wallet did not come from an investment firm. The account Derek drained was the equity line of credit on my house. David froze. He stopped breathing entirely. I never signed a single document authorizing a home equity loan, I stated, staring down at the man I had married. You forged my signature. David's face crumpled. The last remaining ounce of his fabricated authority evaporated instantly, leaving behind a pathetic, trembling shell of a man. He dropped to his knees right there on the expensive Persian rug, grasping wildly at the hem of my tailored suit skirt. Maya, please, David, begged, his voice cracking into a high-pitched whine that echoed pathetically across the silent living room. I was going to put it right back. I swear to you. Derek showed me the projections. He showed me the algorithmic charts. He promised me the token launch would triple the investment in less than 48 hours. I only borrowed the equity to double our money. I did it for us, Maya. I wanted to give us a better life so you would not have to work so hard. I stepped backward, pulling my skirt out of his sweating hands. I looked down at him with absolute disgust. Do not insult my intelligence by pretending you committed felony identity theft for my benefit, I said, my voice dripping with pure contempt. You did it because you are obsessed with maintaining an image of wealth you have not actually earned in a decade. You risked my house, the house I pay the mortgage on, to fund a digital scam run by a 26-year-old con artist who lives in our guest room for free. Eleanor pressed her hand against her chest, her breathing shallow and erratic as she watched her golden child completely humiliate himself. She looked at Marcus silently, begging for some sort of legal lifeline, but Marcus simply shook his head. That is federal wire fraud and identity theft, David Marcus stated flatly, adjusting his gold cufflinks. The minimum sentencing guidelines for defrauding a financial institution of that magnitude are not something you want to experience. You are looking at serious prison time. Hearing the word prison seemed to snap Ashley out of her momentary state of shock. The realization that her free ride was over, and that her father was facing a criminal indictment, ignited a terrifying level of entitlement within her. She stomped her foot on the hardwood floor, completely abandoning the crying victim routine she had attempted just minutes earlier. "Stop acting like this is the end of the world!" Ashley shouted, glaring directly at me with venom in her eyes. "You are a senior forensic accountant for a massive corporate firm. You make a high six-figure salary, Maya. You get massive end-of-year bonuses. $150,000 is nothing to you. Just pay off the stupid loan and make this go away. You are his wife. Family helps family. You are being completely selfish by trying to ruin my dad over a simple mistake." I slowly turned my attention away from the pathetic man on the floor and locked eyes with his equally delusional daughter. The sheer audacity of her demand hung in the dead silence of the room. Even David's brothers winced at her blatant lack of shame. "A simple mistake," I repeated, my voice dropping to a dangerous glacial calm. "Is that what you call it?" I looked back down at David, who was staring at the floor, too cowardly to meet my gaze. "I will never forget the last time your father made a simple mistake," I announced to the room, making sure every single member of his family heard the truth. 5 years ago, David convinced me to co-sign the loan for his brand new Porsche. He swore his real estate commissions would cover the monthly payments easily. He swore it was a necessary business expense to impress high-net-worth clients. I trusted him, but he did not make the payments. He ignored the notices, hid the collection letters from me, and let the car go into default. I took a step closer to Ashley, watching her defiant expression falter. I did not find out until I applied for a specialized mortgage rate and discovered my perfect credit score had been completely destroyed. I continued relentlessly. It took me an entire year of fighting with creditors, paying exorbitant penalty fees out of my own pocket, and working 70-hour weeks to repair the financial damage your father caused me. I bailed him out then because I thought we were building a future together. But the day I finally cleared that debt, I swore to myself that I would never, under any circumstances, carry his financial dead weight again. David let out a loud, pathetic sob. "Maya, please. I have nothing. If you do not pay the bank back, they will call the note due. They will press charges." "That sounds like a personal problem, David," I replied, picking up my half-empty coffee mug from the side table. "You and your visionary son-in-law better start liquidating those cheap designer tracksuits, because I'm not paying a single cent toward a fraudulent loan." Ashley opened her mouth, preparing to launch into another screaming fit about family loyalty and my supposed selfishness. She took a deep breath, her face turning red, but before she could make a sound, a loud, heavy pounding echoed from the front door. The sudden noise startled everyone in the living room. It was not a polite, neighborly knock. It was the aggressive, rhythmic pounding of someone who demanded immediate entry. David scrambled to his feet, his eyes darting frantically toward the front hallway. His face, already pale from the previous revelations, turned completely ghostly. He began backing away from the entryway, his hands shaking violently. "Are you expecting the police already?" Marcus asked me quietly, his lawyer instincts immediately kicking in. I shook my head, my eyes narrowing as I walked toward the front windows and pulled back the heavy linen curtain just an inch. I am not the one who called them. The one. Parked aggressively at the end of my driveway, blocking David's expensive lease vehicle, was a sleek, heavily tinted black SUV. It had no police markings, no municipal license plates, and no flashing lights. Two massive men in sharp, dark suits were standing on my front porch. They did not look like bank auditors or local detectives. They looked like professional muscle. They stood with a rigid, imposing posture, their hands resting casually near the inside of their tailored jackets. They pounded on the door again, the heavy thuds rattling the glass panes. David let out a terrified whimper and pressed his back against the living room wall. "Who are those men, David?" I demanded, dropping the curtain and turning to face my terrified husband. David clamped his hands over his mouth, shaking his head rapidly. Derek took a step backward, his eyes wide with recognition as he peered past me through the window glass. "Those are not bank collectors," Derek whispered, his voice cracking with absolute terror. I looked at David's trembling frame and pieced it together instantly. The timeline of the crypto crash, the desperate need for immediate liquidity. The $150,000 from the equity line was not the only money David had sourced to fix his mess. David, I said coldly, stepping directly into his line of sight. You did not just forge my signature at the credit union. The bank loan was not enough to cover the margin call, was it? Who else did you borrow money from? David squeezed his eyes shut as the men outside began pounding on the door for the third time. I went to a private lender, David choked out, sliding down the wall until he was crouching on the floor again. A bridge loan, just a short-term bridge loan to cover the rest of Derek's position. They said they needed collateral. They said they needed a guarantee. The heavy oak front door shuddered under a massive, violent kick from the men outside. A deep, gruff voice shouted through the wood, demanding that David open up immediately. What collateral did you give a shadow lender, David? I asked, my voice deadly quiet, as the reality of our situation shifted from a domestic dispute into a highly dangerous physical threat. David looked up at me, tears streaming down his face as the door rattled again. I gave them the deed to the house, Maya. I gave them everything. The heavy wood splintered slightly around the deadbolt as another violent kick struck the door. David shrieked, dropping to his hands and knees and scrambling backward until he was literally hiding behind my legs. He clutched the back of my skirt, pressing his face against the fabric like a terrified child. I did not move. I did not flinch. I simply stared at the door, calculating the exact level of physical threat these men posed. Marcus walked past me, his leather shoes clicking sharply against the hardwood. He reached out and unlocked the deadbolt, throwing the door wide open before the men could launch another strike. The two collectors stood on the porch, filling the doorframe with their sheer size. They wore cheap, off-the-rack suits stretched tight over thick muscle. The taller one had a flattened nose and a thick scar running along his jawline. He barely glanced at Marcus, his dark eyes scanning the room until they locked onto David cowering behind me. $50,000, the scarred man said, his voice a low, gravelly rumble that carried easily into the living room. Right now, or we bypass the bank entirely and place an aggressive, non-judicial lien on this property. You have exactly 10 minutes to produce the wire transfer, David. David let out a muffled sob against my leg. We do not have it. The market crashed. The second collector stepped forward, placing a heavy boot over the threshold. We do not care about the market. We care about the collateral. You signed the paperwork. The house is ours unless the balance is cleared today. We can do this the easy way, or we can do this the hard way, and start taking inventory of your valuables right now. He looked directly at the massive television and then down at my grandmother's jewelry box, which was still resting on the floor near Ashley's feet. Marcus smoothly stepped directly into the man's path, completely blocking his entry. He calmly reached into his tailored suit jacket and pulled out a sleek silver pen and a small legal notepad. You will not be taking inventory of anything, Marcus said, his voice entirely devoid of fear. In fact, you are going to turn around and walk back to your vehicle. If your foot crosses this threshold one more inch, I will have you arrested for criminal trespassing and attempted home invasion. The scarred man sneered, sizing Marcus up. Look, lawyer. This is a legitimate debt collection. The coward on the floor signed a bridge loan agreement. There is absolutely nothing legitimate about a shadow loan carrying a usurious interest rate. Marcus fired back, his tone turning razor sharp. I know exactly who you work for. I recognize the collection tactics. You are operating an unlicensed lending operation. The interest rates you charge David exceed the state-mandated maximum by at least 400%. That automatically invalidates the entire contract under the state usury laws. The second man cracked his knuckles. You think paper laws stop a lien? I think federal extortion laws stop you. Marcus replied smoothly, pointing his silver pen directly at the man's chest. What you are doing right now constitutes a violation of the Racketeer-Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act. Threatening physical force or unlawful property seizure to collect an illegal debt is a federal felony. If you do not leave this property in the next 5 seconds, I am calling my personal contacts at the FBI field office and the state attorney general. I will personally ensure your shadow lending operation is raided by SWAT before the sun sets. The two collectors froze. They were used to intimidating desperate gamblers and panicked business owners, not facing down a high-powered corporate litigator who knew exactly how to dismantle their entire operation. The scarred man clenched his jaw, glaring at Marcus. Then he looked past him, pointing a thick finger at David. "This buys you 24 hours, David. The boss will have our own lawyers look at this. But you still owe the principal. If we do not get paid, the legal shield goes away and we come back." They turned in unison, marching down the porch steps and climbing back into their black SUV. The tires screeched against the asphalt as they sped away from the curb. Marcus closed the heavy oak door, throwing the deadbolt and locking it securely. He turned around his face, a mask of absolute professional fury. He walked over to David and grabbed him by the collar, hauling him roughly to his feet. "Get your laptop," Marcus ordered, his voice echoing in the silent room. "Get the loan documents you signed. Show them to me right now." David stumbled toward his leather briefcase resting near the couch. His hands shook so badly he could barely pull the laptop out. He opened it, typed in his password, and pulled up a PDF document. He handed the machine to Marcus, unable to look his brother-in-law in the eye. Marcus adjusted his cuffs and began reading the digital contract. The living room was dead silent. Ashley stood rigidly near the fireplace, no longer screaming about family loyalty. Eleanor remained frozen on the sofa, looking at her son with a mixture of horror and profound disappointment. I walked over and stood beside Marcus, reading the screen over his shoulder. The document was a predatory bridge loan agreement. The terms were completely illegal, but that was not the part that caught my attention. I stared at the signature line at the bottom of the fourth page. There, rendered in a perfectly executed digital font, was my full legal signature alongside David's. He had used my electronic signature file, the one I kept secured for authorized tax documents, to validate the collateral on the house. Marcus let out a slow, sharp breath. He looked up from the screen and met my eyes. He nodded once, confirming exactly what I already knew. "This is not just a bad financial decision, Maya," Marcus stated, his voice ringing with absolute legal certainty. "This is federal wire fraud. This is aggravated identity theft. He used your credentials across state lines to secure funds under false pretenses." I looked at the digital signature. The sheer gravity of David's betrayal settled over me like a heavy, suffocating blanket. He had not just risked his own future, he had actively, maliciously compromised mine to save himself. The power dynamic in the room shifted completely. It was no longer a domestic argument. It was no longer a dispute about finances or stepdaughters. I held the absolute power to send my husband to a federal penitentiary for a minimum of 10 years. One phone call to the authorities, one simple fraud report to the lending institution, and David's life as a free man would be permanently over. David collapsed to his knees again. He brought his hands together in a desperate praying motion. "Maya, please." He choked out, tears streaming down his face and dripping onto his expensive shirt. I was desperate. The margin call was going to liquidate everything. Derek said the token launch would clear the debt before the shadow lender ever came calling. "I never meant to hurt you. Please do not call the police. I will do anything." I stared down at him. The man I had supported, the man I had covered for the man who had just tried to sacrifice my home to save his own pathetic ego. He was a parasite, and it was finally time to cut him off completely. "Get up," I commanded. David scrambled to his feet, swaying slightly, his eyes wide with terrified hope. "I will make you a deal," I said, my voice cold and precise. "I will transfer $50,000 from my private account to clear the shadow debt today. I will get those violent collectors off your back and out of my driveway permanently." David let out a massive breath, a look of profound relief washing over his face. "Oh, thank God." "Maya, thank you. I promise I will." "I am not finished," I snapped, silencing him instantly. "I will pay the $50,000. But in exchange, Marcus is going to draft a quitclaim deed right now. You are going to sign it immediately. You will surrender your remaining 10% marital equity in this house entirely to me. You will walk away from this property and this marriage with absolutely zero assets." Marcus did not even blink. He reached into his leather briefcase, pulled out his sleek laptop, and connected to the wireless printer in my home office. Within 10 minutes, the machine whirred to life, spitting out a perfectly formatted quitclaim deed. Marcus placed the crisp white pages onto the glass coffee table, right next to the velvet box containing my grandmother's diamonds. He unscrewed the cap of his silver pen and held it out. "Sign it," Marcus ordered, his tone leaving absolutely no room for negotiation. "Eleanor and I will act as the legal witnesses." David stared at the pen as if it were a venomous snake. He looked at me, his eyes begging for a reprieve, a second chance, a shred of the blind loyalty I had offered him for the past 6 years. He found absolutely nothing but cold, hardened resolve. I had my phone in my hand, the banking application open, my thumb hovering over the transfer authorization button. "If you do not sign that paper right now, David, I will put my phone away," I said evenly. "I will let those 2 men in cheap suits come back tomorrow and take whatever they want. And then I will call the FBI to report the wire fraud. You have exactly 10 seconds to make your choice." David let out a broken, pathetic gasp. He snatched the silver pen from Marcus and violently scrawled his name across the signature line. He pushed the paper away, burying his face in his hands, completely defeated. I tapped the screen of my phone, authorizing the $50,000 wire transfer directly to the shadow lender's routing number. The confirmation screen appeared a second later. I turned my phone around to show Marcus. He nodded, taking a picture of the confirmation with his own phone and sending it to the number the scarred collector had left behind. "It is done," I announced to the silent room. "The debt is cleared. But let me make one thing crystal clear to everyone sitting in this house. You do not own anything here anymore, David. You are a guest under my roof, and guests can be asked to leave at any moment." Eleanor stood up from the sofa, her face pale, and walked out the front door without saying a single word to her son. Marcus gathered his things, gave me a brief, respectful nod, and followed his mother. Ashley remained frozen by the fireplace. She stared at the signed quitclaim deed on the table, her mind slowly processing the devastating reality of what had just happened. Her father had surrendered his equity. The house, the expensive property she had undoubtedly planned to inherit or leverage for her own luxurious lifestyle, was now entirely mine. Her free ride, her future safety net, had just vanished into thin air. Her face contorted into a mask of pure, unadulterated rage. She glared at me, her chest heaving, but she said nothing. She spun on her heel and stormed up the stairs, pulling Derek along behind her. The next morning, I woke up early, dressed in my sharpest corporate suit, and left for my office downtown. I had a massive forensic audit to finalize for a corporate client, and I refused to let my disastrous family life impact my career. I left David sitting at the kitchen island, staring blankly at a cold cup of coffee. I assumed the reality of his situation would keep him and his entitled daughter completely subdued. I was entirely wrong. I returned home just after 6 in the evening. As I turned my car onto my quiet, tree-lined street, my stomach immediately plummeted. The street was lined with unfamiliar cars. At least a dozen vehicles were parked haphazardly along the curbs, some completely blocking my neighbors' driveways. As I pulled into my own driveway, the heavy, rhythmic thud of bass vibrated through the closed windows of my car. I stepped out into the evening air. The front door of my house was propped wide open. Empty red plastic cups littered my perfectly manicured front lawn. A discarded pizza box was floating in the birdbath. Shouts, raucous laughter, and blaring hip-hop music echoed from the living room. I walked through the front door, my heels clicking sharply against the hardwood floor. The entryway was a disaster zone of muddy shoes and spilled beer. Dozens of 20-somethings people I had never seen before in my life were crowded into my living room and kitchen. They were drinking from my glassware, sitting on my expensive furniture, and dropping ashes onto my expensive rugs. I ignored them all. My instincts pulled me directly toward the hallway leading to my home office. The heavy oak door to my office, which I always kept securely locked, had been forcefully kicked open. The wood around the strike plate was splintered and cracked. I stepped into the room and the breath completely left my lungs. Total, absolute devastation. My custom mahogany desk was sticky with spilled alcohol. Both of my high-definition ultra-wide monitors were splattered with dark red wine, the liquid dripping down the expensive screens and pooling onto my mechanical keyboard. But the worst part was the floor. It looked as though it had snowed inside my office. Thousands of tiny shredded strips of paper covered the Persian rug. The heavy-duty crosscut shredder sitting in the corner was actively smoking, having clearly been run continuously for hours. Standing in the center of this absolute ruin was Ashley. She was holding a red plastic cup, swaying slightly to the music echoing from the hallway. Derek was sitting on my leather reading chair, looking profoundly uncomfortable, but Ashley was absolutely beaming. The malicious, triumphant smirk on her face told me everything I needed to know. "Oops," Ashley drawled, taking a slow sip from her cup. "We were playing beer pong in the hallway and things got a little crazy. Someone must have bumped the door. It was just a total accident, Maya." She kicked a pile of shredded paper with her designer sneaker, scattering the confetti across the room. "I guess some of your super important, highly confidential client files fell into the shredder," she said, her voice dripping with fake sympathy. "You are always so meticulous, Maya. Always acting like your career is more important than family. It would be a real shame if your corporate bosses fired you for losing all their sensitive financial data. I mean, how are you going to pay for this big empty house without your fancy job?" She looked at me eagerly, waiting for the explosion. She wanted me to scream. She wanted me to cry over the destruction of my professional life. She thought she had completely crippled me. I did not raise my voice. I did not shed a single tear. I calmly unbuttoned my suit jacket, draped it over my arm, and walked directly into the center of the room. My heels crunched over the shredded paper. I bent down, picked up a single mutilated strip of paper, and examined the faint traces of ink left on the margin. I looked back up at Ashley, a terrifyingly calm, razor-sharp smile spreading across my face. "You did not destroy my client files, Ashley," I said, my voice eerily pleasant. "My corporate files are secured on an encrypted cloud server, protected by biometric authentication. I never keep physical copies of client data in a residential office." Ashley's smug smile faltered slightly. She glanced down at the massive pile of shredded documents covering the floor, sudden confusion flashing in her eyes. "Then what did we shred?" I tossed the tiny strip of paper back onto the pile. "You just destroyed the only physical copies of your husband's crypto tax evasion records," I replied, my eyes shifting to Derek, who suddenly went completely rigid in the leather chair. "I spent the last 3 weeks compiling every single hidden ledger, offshore transfer, and undeclared capital gain. Derek tried to hide from the federal government. I printed the hard copies out last night." I stepped closer to Ashley, my smile widening as the pure horror finally began to wash over her face. "The IRS was supposed to collect those tomorrow morning," I whispered. "And now you have just committed federal tampering with evidence on top of his tax fraud." Derek vaulted out of the leather reading chair as if he had been physically struck by lightning. He shoved past Ashley, dropping to his knees and frantically clawing at the mountain of shredded paper on the Persian rug. He scooped up handfuls of the tiny, jagged strips, his eyes wide with a manic, unhinged panic. "Are you completely out of your mind?" Derek screamed at his wife, his voice cracking hysterically. "You shredded the physical ledgers. You destroyed the annotations." Ashley backed against the wall, dropping her red plastic cup. The spilled beer seeped into the baseboards, but she did not even notice. "I did not know, Derek. She told me to get a necklace. She tried to frame me. I was just trying to ruin her client files to get back at her. How was I supposed to know what was on the desk?" Derek threw the handful of confetti into the air with a primal yell. "Because you are an idiot, Ashley. Those hard copies were my only bargaining chip. They contained the exact wallet seed phrases and offline transaction hashes I needed to surrender to the Securities and Exchange Commission to negotiate a plea deal. The feds already have the blockchain data, but without those specific decryption keys to prove I was cooperating, I have absolutely no leverage. You just handed me a 20-year federal prison sentence on a silver platter." Ashley covered her mouth, her eyes darting wildly toward me as the catastrophic reality of her actions finally took hold. She had thought she was delivering a fatal blow to my career. Instead, she had just permanently sealed her husband's fate. Derek scrambled to his feet. His panic rapidly mutated into a desperate, cornered aggression. He turned his sights on me. He closed the distance between us, stepping squarely into my personal space. He stood several inches taller than me, his chest heaving under his designer track jacket, his fists clenched tightly at his sides. "You are going to fix this," Maya Derek demanded, his tone dropping into a low, threatening growl. "You are a senior auditor. You have the security credentials. You have backdoor access to the IRS submission portals. You are going to sit down at that computer right now, log into their system, and completely wipe my digital footprint. You are going to erase everything you sent them, or I swear to God you will regret it." I did not flinch. I did not step back. I looked at his clenched fists and then looked up directly into his bloodshot eyes. I let out a sharp, genuine laugh that echoed through the ruined office. "Derek, do you honestly think towering over me in a sweaty tracksuit is going to intimidate me into committing a federal cybercrime?" I asked, my voice ringing with absolute chilling amusement. "You are completely delusional." Derek bared his teeth, leaning in closer. "I am not playing games with you, Maya. Erase the files." I held my ground, keeping my eyes locked dead onto his. "Let me tell you a quick story about how I handle intimidation, Derek. 3 years ago, the chief executive officer of a Fortune 500 logistics conglomerate realized I had uncovered his massive offshore embezzlement scheme. He did not yell at me in a residential hallway. He locked me inside a soundproof corporate boardroom on the 50th floor of a high-security building. I watched Derek's jaw tighten, but I did not stop speaking. "That CEO stood exactly where you are standing right now," I continued, my tone dropping to a whisper of pure steel. "He told me that if I did not alter the quarterly earnings report to cover his tracks, he would utterly destroy my career. He threatened to bankrupt me. He subtly threatened my physical safety. He was a billionaire with a network of incredibly dangerous people at his disposal." "Do you know what I did, Derek?" Derek swallowed hard, the false bravado beginning to crack. I smiled at him, unlocked the boardroom door, walked straight to my car, and handed his unredacted financials directly to the Federal Bureau of Investigation. I stated clearly, "He is currently serving 12 years in a federal penitentiary. I am entirely immune to intimidation, especially from a pathetic amateur crypto scammer who still lives in his father-in-law's guest room." Derek took a slow, involuntary step backward, the fight completely draining out of him. "Grab a trash bag and clean up my floor," I ordered, turning my back on both of them. "And then pack your bags. You are officially evicted." I walked out of the home office, leaving them standing in the wreckage of their own profound stupidity. I went straight to the master suite, locked the door, and went about my evening routine. I knew exactly how arrogance operated, and I knew Derek's desperation had not magically evaporated. He considered himself a brilliant tech founder. He would never accept defeat simply because I told him no. Hours later, the house finally fell completely silent. The obnoxious party guests had been cleared out. The thumping bass was gone. The only sound was the distant ticking of the hallway grandfather clock. Downstairs, Derek slipped out of the guest room. He moved silently through the dark kitchen, his bare feet making no sound on the imported tile. He was sweating, his heart hammering against his ribs. He knew I occasionally left my secondary unsecured testing laptop on the kitchen island. He assumed he could outsmart me. He genuinely believed his basic coding skills could bypass my local security protocols. He found the silver laptop resting exactly where he hoped it would be. He opened the lid. The screen glowed to life, illuminating his anxious face in the dark kitchen. Surprisingly, it did not ask for a biometric scan. It booted straight to the desktop. Derek let out a quiet sigh of relief, instantly convinced of his own superior intellect. His fingers flew across the trackpad. He bypassed the basic user interface and pulled up the local directory, furiously scanning the hard drive for any trace of the audit files. He opened folders, checked the recent activity logs, and scoured the hidden system caches. Then he saw it. Resting blatantly in the center of the secondary drive was a massive folder. The title was boldly labeled IRS_crypto_submissions. Derek smirked in the darkness. He highlighted the folder. He did not hesitate for a fraction of a second. He slammed his finger down on the delete key. He quickly opened the recycle bin and permanently erased the contents, purging the data from the hard drive forever. He leaned back, letting out a soft, victorious laugh. He actually thought he had won. He actually thought he had erased his crimes. Suddenly, the laptop screen flashed a violent, blinding shade of blood red. The trackpad completely locked up. The keyboard went entirely dead. Derek jabbed at the escape key, panic instantly gripping him again, but the machine was completely unresponsive. A loud, synthetic automated voice boomed from the laptop speakers, echoing off the kitchen walls and shattering the silence of the house. Warning: Federal honeypot breached. IP address logged and reported. Evidence tampering protocols activated. Local authorities have been notified. The automated voice echoed through the dark kitchen, repeating its warning on a continuous, inescapable loop. Derek stood completely paralyzed, his fingers still hovering over the keyboard as the harsh red light bathed his terrified face. I did not even bother going downstairs to witness his breakdown. I simply rolled over in my comfortable bed, pulled the comforter up, and went to sleep, knowing the federal gears were already grinding into motion. Promptly at 8 o'clock the next morning, the sharp, persistent ring of the doorbell shattered the tense silence of the house. I walked downstairs in my silk robe, a fresh cup of coffee in my hand, to find David, Ashley, and Derek huddled in the living room. None of them had slept. Dark circles bruised their eyes, and Derek was pacing a trench into the Persian rug, muttering frantically under his breath. I unlocked the front door. A postal worker stood on the porch holding a digital scanner and two thick, imposing envelopes marked with red certified mail stamps. I signed for the delivery, thanked the mail carrier, and closed the heavy door. I walked into the living room and tossed the envelopes onto the glass coffee table. They landed with a heavy, definitive thud right next to the spot where David had signed away his home equity the day before. "One is for you, David," I stated, taking a slow sip of my coffee. "The other is for Derek. Open them." David lunged for the envelope bearing his name, his hands trembling violently as he ripped through the heavy paper. Derek snatched his own envelope, his breath coming in short, erratic gasps, as he tore open the flap. I watched their eyes dart across the crisp official letterhead. Derek dropped his letter, his knees buckling as he collapsed onto the sofa. "It is the Securities and Exchange Commission," he whispered, his voice entirely devoid of his usual arrogance. "They are freezing my exchange accounts. They have a subpoena for all communication records spanning the last 4 years. The IRS Criminal Investigation Division has officially opened an audit into my undeclared tokens. They logged the exact timestamp of my deletion attempt last night." Ashley let out a piercing shriek, clutching the sides of her head. "What does that mean, Derek? It means I'm going to federal prison." "Ashley!" Derek yelled, his face turning a blotchy, panicked red. He threw the letter onto the floor as if it were physically burning him. David was staring at his own letter, his mouth hanging completely open. "The Department of Justice," he mumbled, completely stunned. "They are auditing my bridge loan applications. They flagged the digital signature as fraudulent. They are investigating the shell company I used to mask the margin call." Panic fully set in. The reality of their respective crimes was no longer a theoretical threat hidden in shredded paper or deleted folders. It was printed on federal letterheads, stamped with tracking numbers, and carrying the full, crushing weight of the United States government. David looked up from his letter. The sheer terror in his eyes rapidly mutated into a desperate, malicious calculation. He looked around the luxury living room, his gaze landing on my calm, unbothered expression. The realization that I was a wealthy, successful woman who was entirely insulated from his destruction triggered a vicious survival instinct. "You are not getting out of this clean." "Maya." David spat, his voice trembling with a mixture of fear and newfound malice. "We are legally married. We live in a marital property state. You make 6 figures and your design firm brings in massive corporate retainers. If the federal government comes after me for financial restitution or legal fees, they come after us. My debt is your debt. Debt is..." He stood up suddenly, emboldened by his own twisted logic. He smoothed the front of his wrinkled shirt, trying to project an authority he had completely lost. "You forced me to sign away the house equity," he sneered, stepping aggressively toward me. But that does not erase the marriage license. You think you are so smart, Maya? You think you can just watch me burn while you sit in your ivory tower? The federal government does not care about your little quitclaim deed when it comes to marital assets. I am going to hire the most expensive white-collar defense team in the city, and your accounts are going to pay the retainers. He pulled his phone from his pocket, his thumb jabbing aggressively at the screen. I am calling my attorney right now. We are going to place a freeze on your business assets so you cannot hide the money before my legal bills hit. David hit the speakerphone icon and placed the phone on the coffee table. The phone rang twice before a smooth professional voice answered. Brent Harrison, legal counsel. Brent, it is David, my husband, barked, puffing out his chest and glaring at me. I have a major federal issue. The Department of Justice is auditing my recent bridge loans. I need you to assemble a defense team immediately. And I need you to initiate a lock on my wife's corporate accounts to ensure marital funds are available to cover my entire legal defense. There was a brief pause on the line. I took another slow sip of my coffee, savoring the rich, dark roast. David Brent replied, his voice laced with sudden caution. If the DOJ is investigating you for financial fraud, I cannot legally compel your wife to liquidate her business assets to cover your criminal defense, especially considering the specific nature of your marital asset structure. What are you talking about? David demanded, leaning over the table. She is my wife. Her income is marital property. I have a legal right to use it to defend myself. We do not have a prenuptial agreement. David looked at me, a triumphant, ugly smirk twisting his features. He genuinely thought he had found the ultimate loophole. He thought his sheer audacity would force me to drain my hard-earned accounts to clean up the catastrophic mess he had created. I did not shout. I did not argue. I simply set my coffee mug down on the mantelpiece, reached into my leather purse, and pulled out a crisp, notarized legal document enclosed in a thick blue folder. I walked over to the coffee table and dropped the folder right next to his phone. You are absolutely right, David, I said, my voice dangerously calm and precise. We do not have a prenuptial agreement. I looked down at his confused, fearful face. You mean the spousal laws that were nullified by the post-nuptial agreement you signed 3 years ago? I asked, leaning in close enough for him to see the absolute certainty in my eyes. David stared at the blue folder. The color completely drained from his face as the memory finally broke through his panic. 3 years ago, David had accumulated a massive secret gambling debt, betting on offshore sports syndicates. He had begged me on his hands and knees to bail him out before the bookies destroyed his life. I had paid the debt, saving him from total ruin, but I had demanded absolute financial protection in return. He had been so desperate for the bailout cash that he signed the papers without a second thought, assuming he could always manipulate me later. David flipped open the blue folder with shaking fingers. He stared at his own signature, legally witnessed and notarized, at the bottom of the ironclad document. It explicitly stated that any future debts, criminal liabilities, or financial obligations incurred by David were solely his own, fully isolating my personal and business assets from his liabilities. Brent is not going to freeze my accounts, David, I stated, looking directly at the speakerphone. Brent is going to advise you that you are entirely on your own. David stared at the blue folder, his chest heaving with ragged, uneven breaths. He lunged for his phone, jabbing the speaker button to call his lawyer back, but the line went straight to a sterile, automated voicemail. Brent had already washed his hands of the situation. David slammed his phone down onto the glass table, cracking the screen protector. He pointed a trembling finger at me, his face twisted in pure, desperate rage. This is not over, Maya, he hissed, spit flying from his lips. You cannot just discard me. I will find a lawyer who knows how to break that piece of trash document. I will drag you down with me. He turned and stormed out of the front door, leaving it wide open. I calmly walked over, shut the door, and went back to my coffee. The following afternoon, David made good on his threat. I was sitting at my kitchen island organizing the final digital files for my corporate client when the front door swung open. David marched into the entryway, his posture radiating a forced, artificial arrogance. Trailing closely behind him was a man who looked like he had crawled out of the deepest, darkest swamp of the legal profession. The man wore a shiny, ill-fitting charcoal suit that reeked of cheap cologne and stale cigar smoke. His hair was slicked back with heavy pomade, and he carried a scuffed leather briefcase that looked like it had been dragged behind a car. He did not bother wiping his shoes on the mat. He walked directly into my kitchen, tossed his briefcase onto the marble counter, and slammed his hands down, leaning aggressively into my personal space. Maya. I assume the man sneered, flashing a smile full of overly whitened teeth. My name is Vance Cutler. I am your husband's new legal representation. We are here to discuss the immediate revocation of that laughable post-nuptial agreement you forced my client to sign under extreme financial duress. I kept my eyes locked on my laptop screen. I did not invite you into my home, Mr. Cutler. You are trespassing. Vance let out a harsh, barking laugh. He reached into his briefcase and slapped a thick stack of legal documents onto the marble island. You can play hardball all you want, Lady Vance threatened, his voice rising in volume to fill the room. But I specialize in dismantling amateur contracts. My client was a severe gambling addict. You preyed on his vulnerable mental state to coerce him into surrendering his marital rights. That is the textbook definition of legal unconscionability. If you do not sign this revocation right now, I will file a massive civil suit by tomorrow morning. I will tie up your business assets, freeze your personal accounts, and drown you in litigation for the next 5 years. You will be paying my legal fees while you watch your precious design firm go entirely bankrupt. David stood behind Vance, a smug, victorious grin plastered across his face. He crossed his arms, thoroughly enjoying the spectacle of his attack dog threatening me in my own kitchen. Before I could even formulate a response, the heavy oak front door swung open once again. Marcus stepped into the entryway carrying a stack of real estate transfer documents. He froze his sharp eyes instantly, assessing the aggressive posture of the stranger leaning over my kitchen counter. Marcus dropped his files onto the entryway table, unbuttoned his tailored suit jacket, and walked into the kitchen with the cold, calculated precision of a predator zeroing in on its prey. I highly suggest you step back from my sister-in-law, Marcus stated, his voice dangerously soft, but carrying the weight of an absolute command. Vance scoffed, looking Marcus up and down. And who are you supposed to be? The butler. Stay out of this, pal. I am explaining the brutal reality of family law to this stubborn woman. Marcus did not raise his voice. He simply stepped directly next to me, squaring his shoulders against Vance. You are explaining absolutely nothing, Marcus countered, his tone dripping with professional disdain. You are threatening a frivolous lawsuit based on a fundamental misrepresentation of state statutes. The post-nuptial agreement was signed with independent legal counsel present for both parties. The consideration was the immediate payment of a $50,000 illicit gambling debt, which constitutes fair and adequate exchange under the state civil code. Financial desperation caused by a party's own criminal negligence does not legally constitute duress. If you file that injunction, I will personally file a Rule 11 sanctions motion against you for submitting malicious, baseless litigation. Vance's face flushed a deep, angry purple. He slammed his fist onto the marble counter. You think quoting a few statutes scares me? Suit, Vance yelled, spittle flying from his lips. I have ruined people for far less. I will drag this family through the mud. I will make sure the federal investigators look directly at her business accounts. I will tear her corporate life apart piece by piece until she begs to settle. Vance leaned forward, planting his hands firmly on the counter to intimidate Marcus. As he did, his right hand landed directly next to my open leather portfolio. Resting on top of the dark leather was my embossed corporate business card. Vance glanced down. His eyes caught the bold silver lettering printed on the thick cardstock. Maya Sterling, Senior Forensic Auditor, Sterling Financial Forensics. Vance completely stopped breathing. The angry purple flush drained from his face so fast he looked physically ill. His eyes widened in absolute paralyzing horror. He slowly looked up from the business card, his gaze locking onto my face, as if he were staring at a ghost. I closed my laptop and finally gave him my full, undivided attention. I offered him a terrifyingly calm, razor-sharp smile. You recognize the firm name, do you not, Vance? I asked, my voice a deadly quiet whisper. Vance took a sudden staggering step backward, his hands flying off the marble counter as if it had burned him. Let me refresh your memory. I continued, standing up and leaning toward him. 4 years ago, the State Bar Association hired an independent forensic auditor to investigate a mid-sized law firm named Harrison Vance and Gable. There were rumors of missing escrow funds and client retainers being funneled into offshore accounts. The partners thought they had hidden the money perfectly. They thought their digital trails were completely untraceable. David looked back and forth between us, his smug grin melting into utter confusion. What is she talking about, Vance? I kept my eyes pinned entirely on the sweating lawyer. I was the lead auditor on that case, Vance. I spent 6 months dissecting your miserable little firm. I personally unraveled the shell companies. I traced the wire transfers. I handed the federal authorities a perfectly wrapped, indisputable evidence package. Your 2 senior partners were disbarred, federally indicted, and sent to a minimum security prison for 7 years. Vance was shaking. He backed into the kitchen island, his chest heaving. You only escaped federal indictment because you turned state's witness and sold out your partners, I stated, stepping around the counter and backing him toward the front door. You barely kept your law license. You have spent the last 4 years scraping the bottom of the barrel, taking desperate cases from pathetic criminals like my husband. And now you want to threaten my business accounts. You want to threaten to expose my financials. I tilted my head, my smile never wavering. Please, Vance, file the injunction. Let us invite the federal investigators into this house. Let us see whose financial history holds up better under the microscope. Vance Cutler did not say a single word. He lunged for the kitchen counter, frantically sweeping his scattered legal documents into a messy pile. He shoved the crumpled papers into his battered briefcase, entirely missing the latch, and leaving the flap hanging wide open. Vance, what are you doing? David yelled, panic finally piercing through his arrogance. Tell her we are filing the suit. Tell her we are taking the house. Vance spun around, his face slick with cold sweat. He pointed a shaking finger squarely at David's chest. You did not tell me who your wife was, you absolute moron! Vance screamed, his voice cracking in pure terror. You are completely insane if you think I am going anywhere near her finances. He turned and sprinted for the front door. He yanked it open, nearly tripping over the threshold, and sprinted down the driveway. The sound of his car tires squealing against the pavement echoed through the open door, leaving David standing in the center of my kitchen, completely and utterly unrepresented. The screech of Vance's tires faded into the quiet suburban evening. David stood frozen in the center of the kitchen, staring at the open front door, as if expecting his savior to magically reappear. Marcus calmly walked over, shut the door, and locked it with a sharp, definitive click. Well, Marcus said, straightening his cuffs, that was incredibly efficient. Ashley and Derek crept out from the hallway, having clearly heard the entire humiliating exchange. Derek looked physically ill, still clutching his dead laptop, grappling with his impending federal indictment. Ashley, however, quickly assessed the ruined state of their defense. Her eyes darted from the empty driveway to her father's pale face, and finally, to me. Her predatory instincts instantly shifted gears. If legal threats and aggressive posturing failed, she would resort to pure emotional terrorism. Ashley's face abruptly crumpled. She let out a loud theatrical sob, burying her face in her hands. Her shoulders shook with exaggerated distress. You cannot do this to us, Maya, she wailed, sinking onto one of the kitchen bar stools. She wiped away a non-existent tear, looking up at me with wide, pleading eyes. You cannot throw us out on the street. Not now. Not when we are so vulnerable. She placed a protective hand over her flat stomach. I am pregnant. Derek blinked, looking at his wife in genuine shock. He opened his mouth to speak, but Ashley swiftly kicked him under the counter, silencing him. His confusion confirmed exactly what I suspected. This was a completely spontaneous fabrication, a desperate lie deployed to secure her footing in my house. David, however, latched onto the lie like a drowning man grabbing a life preserver. The utter defeat vanished from his posture. He stood up straight, his chest puffing out with righteous manufactured indignation. He instantly used his daughter's fictional pregnancy as a weapon to reclaim his lost territory. "Did you hear that, Maya?" David demanded, taking a heavy step toward me. "My daughter is carrying my grandchild. You are not just dealing with us anymore. You are dealing with a growing family. You cannot legally or morally evict a pregnant woman. The courts would absolutely destroy you for throwing a mother and an unborn child out into the cold." He crossed his arms, his arrogance inflating by the second. He genuinely believed he had found the ultimate shield. "In fact," David continued, his voice taking on a commanding, authoritative tone, "the guest room is entirely inadequate for a pregnant woman's needs. Derek is under immense stress from the federal audit, Ashley needs comfort, and they need space to prepare for the baby. You will pack up your belongings and vacate the master suite tonight. You can take the guest room down the hall. It is the only decent, humane thing to do." I stared at him, marveling at the sheer, unadulterated audacity. He was bankrupt under federal investigation and stripped of his home equity, yet he was ordering me out of my own bedroom. David was not finished. He leaned closer, lowering his voice into a tone of weaponized sympathy. He decided to twist the deepest, most agonizing knife he could find. "You know exactly how fragile a pregnancy can be, Maya," David said softly, his eyes locking onto mine. "You know what stress does to a mother." He held my gaze, intentionally weaponizing my own past against me. "You remember what happened with our baby. You remember the miscarriage. Do not put my daughter through that same trauma. Have some basic empathy for a mother." Marcus tensed violently beside me. He took a half step forward, his hands balling into tight fists, his professional demeanor finally cracking under the weight of David's profound cruelty. 5 years ago, I had lost a pregnancy at 19 weeks. It had shattered my world. I had spent weeks in a fog of absolute devastation. David had been completely emotionally absent during my physical and mental recovery, citing work stress and escaping to the golf course while I grieved in an empty nursery. Now he was dragging my deepest, most sacred pain out into the open, using my dead child as a cheap bargaining chip to secure a larger bedroom for his entitled lying daughter. I put my hand up, stopping Marcus from intervening. I did not break eye contact with David. I did not shed a tear. I did not flinch. Any lingering shred of pity I might have held for the man I once loved instantly evaporated, replaced by a cold, hardened resolve that felt like solid diamond. I let the silence stretch through the kitchen until David's smug expression began to waver under my unwavering stare. I saw right through their amateur theatrical production. I knew Ashley was not pregnant, but even if she was, it would not change the fundamental reality of their eviction. It only changed the methodology of my execution. I allowed a warm, terrifyingly pleasant smile to spread across my face. "Ashley," I said, my voice dripping with honeyed sweetness, "that is absolutely wonderful news. A baby changes everything. It really forces you to prioritize health and safety above all else. You must be so protective of your environment right now." Ashley blinked, clearly unsettled by my calm reception. She offered a hesitant nod, keeping her hand dramatically draped over her stomach. "Yes, exactly. That is why we need the master bedroom. For the baby." I reached into my leather tote bag sitting on the kitchen island. I bypassed my laptop and pulled out a thick, official-looking document bound in a bright red plastic cover. I slid it across the cool marble counter until it rested directly in front of her. "Since a baby is coming and you are currently living under my roof, I had to ensure the environment was perfectly safe for a fragile newborn." I stated, my smile never dropping. "I had the house comprehensively tested last week by a certified municipal environmental inspector." Ashley stared at the red binder, her fake tears instantly drying up. David frowned, stepping closer to read the bold black lettering on the cover. "Unfortunately," I continued, my voice echoing with cheerful finality, "we have a severe toxic mold and lead paint issue hidden deep in the HVAC system and the original drywall. It is highly hazardous, especially for pregnant women. By law, the house must be fully evacuated for a mandatory 3-week hazard remediation. The hazmat crews arrive to seal the property in plastic tomorrow morning at exactly 6 a.m. David laughed, a harsh, dismissive sound that echoed off the high ceilings of the kitchen. He looked at his daughter and shook his head, thoroughly entertained by what he assumed was a desperate, elaborate bluff. "You really think we are that stupid, Maya?" David scoffed, leaning his hip against the marble counter. "You think you can just invent a fictional environmental crisis to legally evict us? I know exactly how you operate. You are trying to scare us into packing our bags, but I am calling your bluff right here and now. We are not packing a single box. We are staying right here in this house." Ashley smirked, crossing her arms protectively over her miraculously flat stomach. "I am certainly not moving my baby into a cheap motel just because you printed out a fake safety report. We are sleeping in tomorrow. You can take your little hazmat threat and shove it." I just gave them a polite, measured nod. I did not waste my breath arguing with people who were entirely detached from reality. I simply turned on my heel, walked up the grand staircase, and went straight to my room. Let them sleep in, or at least let them try. At 5:45 the next morning, the heavy vibrating rumble of diesel engines shook the driveway, rattling the crystal chandelier in the foyer. The sound was absolutely impossible to ignore. At exactly 6 o'clock, the front door, which I had deliberately left unlocked for the foreman, swung wide open. A crew of 12 men stormed into the entryway. They were not just standard contractors, they were a full municipal hazard remediation team. They were strapped into heavy white Tyvek suits, wearing industrial face respirators, and carrying heavy-duty demolition equipment. The noise was immediate and utterly deafening. Circular saws revved to life with a mechanical scream. Heavy rolls of thick, opaque polyurethane plastic were aggressively stapled over the beautiful arched windows and doorways, plunging the lower level into an eerie, artificial twilight. Massive industrial HEPA air scrubbers were hauled into the living room, their turbine engines whining with the intense, high-pitched shriek of a jet engine taking off. Bright yellow warning tape was slapped across the banisters. I heard a panicked, high-pitched scream from down the hall. Ashley burst out of the guest room, her hair a tangled, frantic mess, wearing oversized silk pajamas that she had obviously stolen from my closet. David stumbled out of the master suite a second later, rubbing his bloodshot eyes, completely disoriented by the utter chaos consuming the house. White dust was already beginning to swirl in the air. "What the hell is going on?" David roared, trying to make himself heard over the screech of a reciprocating saw, biting violently into the living room drywall. He marched downstairs and grabbed a foreman by the shoulder. "Get out of my house right now! I am calling the police!" The foreman calmly swatted David's hand away and forcefully tapped the heavy clipboard hanging from his belt. "We have a signed municipal work order, buddy. This entire structure is a designated toxic biohazard zone as of 0600 hours. If you do not have a commercial-grade respirator, you are violating federal safety protocols just by breathing this air. Move out of the way. We are taking these walls down to the structural studs." I stepped out of my bedroom fully dressed in a tailored navy pantsuit, completely unbothered by the apocalyptic destruction happening around me. I calmly rolled my silver aluminum suitcase down the hallway, the wheels clicking smoothly against the hardwood floor. David stared at me, his jaw completely unhinged, hacking aggressively as a thick cloud of white gypsum dust rolled out of the master bedroom where the crew had just ripped down the ceiling panels. "You are totally insane," David coughed, waving his hands frantically to clear the suffocating air. "You destroyed our entire home just to prove a petty point. Where are we supposed to go? We have absolutely nothing." I paused at the top of the stairs, casually adjusting the leather handle of my luggage. "I am going to the Four Seasons," I stated, my voice cutting cleanly through the mechanical roar. It turns out that flying all over the country for 10 years conducting high-level corporate audits while you sat at the country club draining my liquid cash has its perks. I accumulated over 1 million corporate travel points. I booked myself a luxury penthouse suite for the next 3 weeks. It did not cost me a single dime. Ashley started violently coughing, covering her mouth with her silk sleeve. "But what about us?" she shrieked over the deafening whine of an industrial fan. "My baby cannot breathe this toxic air. We do not have any money for a hotel. Derek's accounts are entirely frozen by the feds." I looked down at her with absolute chilling indifference. "I highly suggest you start walking Ashley." The fresh morning air will do absolute wonders for your fictional pregnancy. I walked down the stairs, stepping carefully around a massive pile of shattered drywall and exposed yellow insulation. I handed the foreman my spare key, nodded my thanks, and walked out the front door. The morning air was crisp and clean. I loaded my suitcase into the trunk of my car, put on my sunglasses, and drove away. I left them stranded in a plastic-wrapped, deafening construction zone with no working heating, ventilation, or air conditioning. By noon, I was sitting on the private sun-drenched balcony of my penthouse suite, sipping imported sparkling water and looking out over the sprawling city skyline. The silence was absolutely glorious. I had spent the morning catching up on lucrative client emails and finalizing the evidence logs for the federal authorities regarding Derek's fraudulent crypto accounts. My life was finally unburdening itself from the parasitic weight of my soon-to-be ex-husband and his treacherous family. I was just about to pick up the phone to order an expensive room service lunch when my cell phone buzzed loudly on the glass patio table. The caller ID showed the name Carlos, the lead foreman for the remediation crew back at the house. I answered the call fully expecting a routine update on the structural damage or a basic question about the plumbing lines. Miss Sterling, Carlos said, his voice unusually strained and tight. He was practically shouting over the heavy background noise of the demolition, but there was a sharp, undeniable edge of urgency to his tone that immediately caught my attention. "Yes, Carlos," I replied, setting down my glass. "Is there an issue with the municipal permits? Did my husband refuse to vacate the property?" "No, ma'am. They left a few hours ago, coughing the whole way out down the driveway," Carlos replied. We proceeded with the teardown exactly as instructed. We isolated the guest room where the younger couple was staying. We started removing the east-facing drywall to access the main ventilation shafts. I frowned, sensing the heavy hesitation in his voice. "Go on." "Ma'am, we were tearing down the drywall in that guest room," Carlos said, his breath hitching slightly over the phone. "We found something hidden deep inside the walls." "What do you mean you found something?" I asked, standing up and gripping the cold metal of the balcony railing. "It was packed tight between the wooden studs directly behind the insulation," he explained, his voice dropping into an anxious, hurried whisper. "I am sending you a photograph right now. You need to see this immediately." I halted the entire crew. "Nobody touches this specific area until you tell me exactly what to do." My phone chimed with a loud incoming text message alert. I pulled the phone away from my ear and tapped the screen to open the encrypted image file. I stared at the high-resolution photograph, my heart skipping a violent, erratic beat. The image showed a large, jagged hole ripped violently into the guest room wall. Resting securely in the dark, hollow cavity between the structural beams were 4 heavy-duty black canvas duffel bags. One of the bags had been accidentally sliced open by the aggressive blade of the demolition saw. Spilling out of the torn black canvas, catching the harsh, unforgiving glare of the portable construction work lights, were dozens of thick, tightly banded stacks of sequential $100 bills. I did not type a single word in response. I locked my phone screen, snatched my car keys off the glass table, and sprinted out of the penthouse suite. My mind immediately shifted from a state of relaxed observation into absolute razor-sharp forensic analysis. Derek was a self-proclaimed digital asset pioneer. He mocked fiat currency. He lived his entire life entirely on the blockchain, hoarding digital wallets and offshore crypto exchanges. A man like that does not hide physical paper cash inside a suburban wall unless that cash is incredibly dirty, highly traceable, and absolutely not his own. The puzzle pieces were rapidly aligning in my mind as I sped my car down the highway, weaving aggressively through the afternoon traffic. When I pulled up to the curb of my property, the massive industrial air scrubbers were still screaming from inside the house, but the real chaos was unfolding directly on the front lawn. Derek was completely unhinged. He was covered from head to toe in a thick layer of white gypsum dust, looking like a deranged, rabid ghost. He was physically wrestling with Carlos and 2 other heavily built remediation workers, violently clawing at one of the black canvas duffel bags. His designer track jacket was torn at the shoulder, and a thin line of blood trickled down his cheek, where he had clearly caught an elbow to the face. Give it back to me! Derek shrieked, his voice cracking with a primal animalistic panic. That is my property! You have no right to touch it! I will sue you! I will kill you! Carlos firmly shoved Derek backward, sending the amateur scammer stumbling into the manicured hedges. We found it inside the structural walls of the property, Buddy Carlos barked, gripping the heavy duffel bag securely against his chest. It goes directly to the homeowner. I slammed my car door shut, the sharp metallic crack cutting through the yelling. Step away from the bags, Derek. I commanded, my voice carrying the freezing, undeniable authority of a woman completely in control of her domain. Derek spun around to face me, his eyes wide and bloodshot, his chest heaving violently. Maya, tell them to hand it over, he panted, pointing a shaking, dust-covered finger at the workers. It is mine. It is my money. I walked smoothly across the lawn, my high heels clicking against the concrete walkway. I nodded to Carlos, who immediately stepped forward and dropped the ripped duffel bag directly at my feet. The heavy canvas hit the grass with a dense, weighted thud. Through the jagged tear in the fabric, the crisp green edges of banded $100 bills peeked out into the afternoon sun. Carlos brought the other 3 bags out and stacked them neatly next to the first one. I knelt down on the grass, entirely ignoring the dust, and reached into the torn bag. I pulled out a thick, heavy stack of sequential $100 bills. It is my crypto earnings, Derek blurted out, taking a hesitant step forward, his eyes desperately tracking the cash in my hand. I cashed out my digital tokens before the federal freeze hit my accounts. It is my emergency fiat reserve. You have to give it back to me, Maya. That is my legal property. I did not look at him. I kept my eyes entirely focused on the stack of cash. I ran my thumb over the edge of the bills, feeling the crisp, uncirculated texture. But it was not the money that caught my attention. It was the thick paper band wrapping the bills together. Forensic auditing requires an obsessive attention to microscopic details. Criminals always leave a fingerprint, and Derek was far too arrogant to realize he was holding a smoking gun. I turned the stack of cash over and inspected the heavy white paper band. Printed directly across the center of the band was a faded, distinct purple crest, featuring a double-headed eagle, accompanied by a 9-digit routing code. Banque Privée d'Investissement. I recognized that specific purple stamp immediately. It belonged to an offshore, unregulated shadow bank operating out of a known money-laundering haven. It was a financial institution explicitly blacklisted by the federal government for washing illicit cartel funds, illegal sports betting revenues, and high-level extortion cash. You are an absolute liar, Derek, I stated, my voice dropping into a deadly quiet whisper. I slowly stood up, gripping the banded stack of cash tightly in my hand. This is not crypto money, I continued, taking a slow step toward him. Crypto exchanges do not cash out digital tokens by handing you sequential, uncirculated bills wrapped in the routing bands of an offshore laundering syndicate. You did not earn this money. You are hiding it. Derek swallowed hard, the remaining color completely draining from his pale face. My brilliant, arrogant husband took out a multi-million-dollar bridge loan to cover a catastrophic margin call. I deduced aloud, the entire criminal web finally exposing itself in the bright daylight. But traditional banks do not grant massive, unsecured loans to men with ruined credit. David borrowed money from a shadow lender. And you, Derek, with your encrypted servers and your supposed digital genius, were acting as the physical mule. You are hiding the illicit cash for the very people your father-in-law borrowed from. You are laundering the syndicate's money. A sharp gasp echoed from the edge of the driveway. I turned my head. David and Ashley were standing on the sidewalk. They had clearly been sitting in David's parked car down the street, too broke and desperate to go anywhere else, and had rushed over when the shouting started. David was staring at the 4 overflowing duffel bags sitting on the grass. His eyes were completely dilated, practically bulging out of his skull. The sheer volume of cash hypnotized him. His brain was visibly short-circuiting, aggressively calculating how many of his problems that mountain of money could instantly solve. He did not care about the federal investigations. He did not care about the offshore stamps. He only saw a lifeline. David's eyes lit up with a greedy, unhinged madness. That money can cover my margin call, David whispered, his voice trembling with manic excitement. "That money can pay off my lenders. It can save my entire portfolio." David did not hesitate for a fraction of a second. He completely abandoned any remaining loyalty to his son-in-law. He lunged forward, sprinting across the lawn with his arms outstretched, desperately reaching to steal a bag of the syndicate's cash to pay off his own catastrophic debts. Derek let out a feral, ear-piercing scream of pure panic. If that money disappeared, the shadow lenders would undoubtedly kill him. Derek launched his entire body forward. He tackled his father-in-law squarely around the waist. The two men hit the grass with a violent bone-crunching thud, rolling furiously over the landscaping as they desperately clawed at each other's throats. The pristine manicured lawn instantly became a pathetic, dusty wrestling ring. David swung a heavy, uncoordinated fist, catching Derek right on the cheekbone. Derek retaliated by ripping his father-in-law's expensive cashmere sweater, screaming at the top of his lungs. White drywall dust billowed around them like a toxic smokescreen with every violent roll. They were not just fighting physically, they were verbally crucifying each other, entirely forgetting that they had an audience. "Let go of it!" Derek shrieked, his voice pitching into a hysterical sob as he tried to pry a bundle of hundreds from David's grip. "They will kill me, David. That is syndicate money. You cannot touch it. It was wired through the Cayman shell accounts to hide it from the federal audit. You are signing my death warrant." "I do not care about your federal audit," David roared back, his face purple with exertion as he pinned Derek to the ground. "I am drowning in margin calls. The shadow lenders are taking my entire portfolio. This cash is mine. I introduced you to those offshore bankers, you ungrateful little thief. You leveraged stolen funds." Derek spat spitting grass and dirt out of his mouth. "You committed wire fraud right alongside me. If I go down for money laundering, I am dragging you straight to federal prison with me." I did not intervene. I did not yell. I did not even flinch. I calmly reached into my pocket, pulled out my smartphone, and opened the camera app. I switched the video settings to 4K resolution, tapped the record button, and held the lens perfectly steady. I was capturing every single word, every desperate admission of federal wire fraud, every mention of offshore shell accounts and syndicate money laundering. It was a flawless, high-definition confession served up on a silver platter. "Maya, stop it!" Ashley screamed, her shrill voice piercing the air. She ran across the driveway, her expensive silk pajamas now stained with dirt and sweat. She frantically waved her hands in front of my camera lens. "Put your phone away. Stop recording them. You have to break this up. Call them off. Do something." I smoothly stepped to the side, keeping my camera perfectly angled on the two men brawling in the dirt. I looked at Ashley, my expression completely void of any sympathy. "I am sorry, Ashley," I said, my voice dripping with icy satisfaction. "Do you remember that printed maid schedule you handed me your very first morning here? The one where you assigned me laundry and vacuuming duty? Well, cleaning up your husband's criminal messes simply is not on my schedule today." Ashley gasped, her face crumbling as the reality of her shattered life finally hit her. She looked from me to the massive pile of illegal cash spilling onto the grass, and then to her husband, who was currently getting choked by her own father. Suddenly, the sharp, chaotic noise of the brawl was completely drowned out by the piercing wail of police sirens. Flashing red and blue lights violently illuminated the front lawn, bouncing off the plastic-wrapped windows of my house. The neighbors, thoroughly alarmed by the screaming and the literal demolition happening next door, had called 911. 3 police cruisers aggressively mounted the curb. 6 officers burst out of their vehicles, drawing their tasers and shouting commands. "Separate right now! Hands where we can see them!" The lead officer bellowed, sprinting onto the grass. The officers forcefully ripped David and Derek apart, shoving them face first into the dirt and pinning their arms behind their backs. The metallic click of handcuffs echoed sharply in the cold morning air. I calmly locked my phone, saved the video to a secure cloud server, and walked directly up to the lead officer. I gestured toward the ripped black canvas duffel bags and the scattered sequential $100 bills bearing the purple offshore stamps. "Officers," I stated, my voice ringing with absolute clarity and calm authority. "I believe these two men are fighting over stolen federal funds. The lead officer looked from me to the massive pile of cash, his eyes narrowing as he registered the offshore banking bans. The sheer volume of illicit money was staggering, turning a standard domestic disturbance call into a massive federal crime scene in a matter of seconds. He instantly signaled his partner to secure the perimeter and lock down the evidence. Derek was hyperventilating against the grass, his cheek pressed into the dirt, weeping uncontrollably as an officer patted him down. "It is not mine," Derek sobbed instantly, trying to shift the blame. "He brought it here. David brought it. I was just trying to stop him." "You lying rat!" David bellowed from 3 feet away, struggling pointlessly against his flex cuffs. "You hid it in the walls. You are the one under FBI investigation. Tell them the truth." "Actually, officer," I interjected smoothly, holding up my phone. "I have a 10-minute high-definition video of both of them explicitly admitting to wire fraud, money laundering, and hiding offshore syndicate cash from a federal audit. They kindly laid out their entire criminal enterprise while wrestling in my landscaping. I am more than happy to airdrop the file to your precinct right now." David's face drained of all color, shifting from a furious purple to a sickening chalky white. The absolute gravity of his situation finally crushed him. He was a bankrupt, disgraced former executive who was now going to be handed over to the FBI for participating in a massive money laundering ring. He had lost his company, his equity, his home, and now he had permanently lost his freedom. Ashley fell to her knees on the driveway, burying her face in her hands, letting out a guttural, pathetic wail. There was no fake pregnancy to hide behind anymore. There were no arrogant threats to throw around. Her husband and her father were being hauled up from the dirt by armed police officers, their designer clothes ruined, their lives entirely destroyed by their own bottomless greed and staggering incompetence. "Maya, please," Ashley begged, crawling toward me on the concrete, her silk pajamas tearing at the knees. "You cannot do this. We have nowhere to go. My dad is going to prison. Derek is going to prison. I have absolutely nothing left." I looked down at her, feeling a profound, deeply satisfying sense of closure. The woman who had marched into my home, demanded my master bedroom, and treated me like a servant was now begging at my feet in the dirt. "You have exactly what you earned, Ashley," I said, my voice cold and hard as a diamond. "You built your entire life on lies, entitlement, and other people's money. Now the bill is due. The police will need you to vacate the premises immediately so they can establish a federal crime scene. I suggest you call a taxi. I hear the local homeless shelters are quite accommodating this time of year." I turned my back on her sobbing form and walked over to my car. I did not look back as the officers shoved David and Derek into the back of the squad cars, slamming the heavy doors shut on their pathetic, ruined lives. I slid into the driver's seat of my car, started the engine, and merged smoothly onto the quiet suburban street. The toxic mold remediation would take 3 weeks. After that, I would list the house on the market, sell it for a massive premium, and never look back. My career was thriving, my bank accounts were secure, and the dead weight of David and his parasitic family had been permanently excised from my existence. I drove back toward the city, heading straight for my penthouse suite at the Four Seasons. The morning sun was just beginning to break over the skyline, casting a warm, brilliant light over the road ahead. I smiled, turning up the radio, ready to order the most expensive room service breakfast on the menu. The air had never felt so incredibly clean. My phone rang before I even hit the highway on ramp. The caller ID flashed an unknown local number. I lowered the volume on the radio and answered. "Ms. Sterling," a gruff voice barked over the line. It was the lead officer from the scene. "I apologize for the inconvenience, but we need you to turn your vehicle around and head back to the property immediately. We need your physical signature on the federal asset seizure forms before we can transport the cash, and we have to formally release the interior of the residence back into your custody." I let out a soft sigh, tapping my manicured nails against the leather steering wheel. My luxurious room service breakfast would simply have to wait a little bit longer. "I am turning around right now, officer," I replied smoothly. "I will be there in 5 minutes." When I pulled my car back up to the curb of my house, the scene had escalated from a local domestic dispute to a full-blown federal lockdown. Yellow crime scene tape was strung tightly across the manicured hedges. David and Derek were no longer screaming. They were sitting in the back of two separate police cruisers, their hands cuffed securely behind their backs. I could see Derek weeping silently behind the heavy metal mesh partition, his face pressed against the glass. David was staring blankly at the floorboards, looking like a man who had just watched his entire life evaporate into thin air. They were temporarily detained for the domestic disturbance, while the federal agents meticulously cataloged the massive pile of offshore syndicate cash sitting on my front lawn. I walked past the flashing blue and red lights, bypassing the officers taking photographs of the torn duffel bags, and stepped through my front door. The interior of my home looked like the aftermath of a war zone. The hazard remediation crew had abandoned the site the second the police arrived, leaving the job half-finished. Thick, opaque plastic sheeting hung haphazardly from the archways. Shattered pieces of drywall, exposed wooden studs, and clouds of white gypsum dust covered the expensive hardwood floors. Sitting entirely alone in the dead center of the destroyed living room was Ashley. Her arrogant, untouchable facade had completely shattered. She was huddled on the floor, her knees pulled tightly to her chest, rocking back and forth in the dust. Her expensive silk pajamas were ruined, smeared with dirt and grime from her pathetic crawl across the driveway. Her face was streaked with running mascara. The predatory confidence she had wielded just 24 hours ago was entirely gone, replaced by a raw, suffocating panic. She looked up as my heels clicked against the floorboards. When she saw me standing there looking perfectly composed and completely untouched by the catastrophe around us, something inside her finally broke. Ashley scrambled to her knees, her hands grasping desperately at the air as if she were drowning. "Maya, you have to help me!" Ashley sobbed, her voice a ragged, hyperventilating gasp. "Please, I am begging you. You have to tell the police to let Derek go. You have to tell them it is a misunderstanding. I have absolutely nothing left. My dad's accounts are gone. Derek's accounts are frozen. If they take him away, I am going to be out on the street." I stood perfectly still, looking down at her with an expression of absolute unyielding ice. I did not offer her a hand. I did not offer her a shred of sympathy. "I cannot fix your life, Ashley," I stated, my voice echoing coldly in the empty, hollowed-out room. "You built a house of cards on top of stolen money, and you chose to disrespect the only person who actually owned the property. This is the direct result of your own entitlement." Ashley violently shook her head, tears pouring down her cheeks, smearing her makeup into a chaotic mess. The desperation stripped away her final layer of defense. She resorted to the only weapon she thought she had left, completely unaware that I had already disarmed her. "But I am pregnant, Maya!" she wailed, clutching her stomach in a frantic theatrical display. "You cannot do this to a pregnant woman. You cannot send my baby's father to federal prison. Please, I lied about everything else, but you have to believe me. I need help for the baby." I stared at her, marveling at her absolute inability to stop lying, even when her entire world was actively burning to the ground around her. I slowly crossed my arms over my chest, letting the silence stretch until her sobbing began to falter under my freezing gaze. "You can drop the act, Ashley," I said, my tone deliberately flat and devoid of any emotion. "You are not pregnant. You were never pregnant." Ashley froze, her breath hitching in her throat. Her hands slowly slipped away from her stomach. What she stammered, her eyes darting around the room, as if searching for an escape route. "How can you say that? You do not know that." I let out a short, humorless laugh that held no warmth whatsoever. "I am a senior forensic corporate auditor, Ashley," I explained, stepping closer, so I towered over her kneeling form. "My entire career is built on tracking microscopic financial discrepancies that arrogant people think they have successfully hidden. When you and Derek moved in, Derek handed me a joint credit card to cover your groceries, while his accounts were supposedly tied up in a routine banking delay." Ashley swallowed hard, staring up at me with wide, terrified eyes. "You claimed you were pregnant yesterday evening," I continued, my voice cutting through the dusty air like a scalpel. "But you forgot that I have real-time access to that joint credit card ledger." 2 days ago, at exactly 4:15 in the afternoon, you swiped that card at the local pharmacy 3 blocks from here. I saw the itemized digital receipt. You purchased a venti iced latte, 2 gossip magazines, and a box of super absorbency tampons. I watched the color completely drain from Ashley's face. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. She was entirely paralyzed by the surgical precision of my exposure. Pregnant women do not buy tampons, Ashley, I stated, delivering the final crushing blow. It was a pathetic amateur lie. You weaponized the concept of motherhood, and you intentionally tried to weaponize my own past miscarriage against me, just to secure a larger bedroom in a house that you do not even own. Ashley stared at me, completely speechless, her chest heaving as the absolute reality of her exposure set in. She had no defense. She had no more lies to spin. She slumped forward, resting her forehead against the dusty floorboards, weeping in total, unadulterated defeat. I smoothly reached into my tailored jacket pocket and pulled out my smartphone. I tapped the screen, making sure the audio recording app I had activated before walking through the front door was clearly visible. The red timer was ticking steadily forward, capturing every single pathetic, desperate sob. I crouched down, bringing my face just inches from her ear. I allowed a terrifyingly calm, polite smile to spread across my face. I recorded your fake pregnancy admission just now. I whispered, my voice incredibly soft, ensuring every syllable was perfectly captured by the microphone. Derek's wealthy grandparents, the ones you have been actively scamming out of thousands of dollars in cash for baby supplies and prenatal care over the last 3 weeks, are going to be very, very interested in hearing this audio file. Ashley collapsed completely against the dusty floorboards. The sheer terror in her eyes was incredibly satisfying to witness. She opened her mouth to beg again, but the sound died in her throat. She knew she had lost her ultimate leverage. I did not give her a second glance. I stood up, smoothed an invisible wrinkle from my tailored jacket, and walked out of the destroyed guest room. The toxic white dust settled behind me, burying her in the mess she had helped create. Outside, the lead detective was finalizing the transport of the 4 heavy duffel bags into an armored evidence van. He approached me with a serious expression, pulling a notepad from his utility belt. He informed me that given the massive sum of sequential cash and the offshore banking bans, the FBI was already being notified. He needed me to follow them to the downtown precinct to provide my formal recorded statement. I gave him a polite nod, got into my car, and merged onto the highway. The drive to the station was peaceful. The adrenaline that had spiked during the brawl had completely vanished, leaving behind a cold, calculating focus. I had systematically dismantled David and Derek's amateur criminal operation, but I knew the fallout would ripple much further. The downtown precinct was a chaotic blur of ringing phones, shouting officers, and glaring fluorescent lights. I was escorted to a quiet bench near the detective bullpen. Through a set of reinforced glass windows, I could see David and Derek sitting in separate holding rooms. David was staring blankly at a cinder block wall, completely catatonic. He looked like a deflated balloon, his arrogance entirely punctured by the reality of a federal prison sentence. Derek was actively pacing, waving his hands wildly as he tried to explain his digital asset empire to an entirely unimpressed federal agent. I sat comfortably on the hard wooden bench, sipping a terrible cup of precinct coffee. I pulled out my phone and sent a brief encrypted text to Marcus. I needed my attorney present. The sheer scale of the money laundering ring required absolute legal precision, and Marcus was the best in the city. 20 minutes later, the heavy double doors of the precinct lobby violently swung open. A rush of cold air swept into the room, followed immediately by the overwhelming scent of expensive imported perfume. Eleanor and Arthur Montgomery had arrived. Derek's wealthy, elitist grandparents marched through the station like they owned the entire municipality. Eleanor was draped in a long cashmere coat, clutching a crocodile skin handbag like a weapon. Arthur trailed slightly behind her, wearing a bespoke tweed suit and an expression of profound, aristocratic disgust. They had clearly received a frantic phone call from Ashley and rushed down to bail out their precious grandson. They viewed the police and the justice system as minor inconveniences meant for the lower classes, not for people of their immense social standing. Eleanor spotted me sitting on the bench. Her eyes narrowed into furious, venomous slits. She did not hesitate. She marched directly past the front desk sergeant, completely ignoring his commands to stop, and loomed over me. "You vicious, vindictive woman," Eleanor hissed, her voice vibrating with unrestrained malice. "You set him up. You planted that money to ruin my grandson. Derek is a brilliant, innocent boy. He comes from a pristine, respected lineage. He is a pioneer in his field. He would never involve himself in anything illegal. You are just a bitter ex-wife trying to steal his hard-earned wealth." Arthur stepped up beside his wife, crossing his arms over his chest. He looked down his nose at me, his face twisting into a sneer of pure superiority. "You think you are so clever, Maya," Arthur sneered, his tone dripping with condescension. "You think handing over some cash will make you the hero of this pathetic little drama. You are nothing but a jealous parasite trying to destroy a superior family. We are going to squash you like an insect. I am dispatching my entire legal team to this precinct right now. We are going to sue you for defamation, emotional distress, and malicious prosecution. We will use our vast resources to tie you up in litigation for the rest of your natural life. You will be bankrupt and ruined before the year is over." I remained perfectly seated. I took a slow sip of my coffee, entirely unfazed by their theatrical performance. They were loud, they were arrogant, and they were completely blind to the reality of their situation. I did not need to raise my voice. I did not need to defend myself. Before I could even formulate a response, the precinct doors opened again. Marcus strolled into the lobby. His presence instantly shifted the energy in the room. He wore a razor-sharp charcoal Italian suit, holding a slim leather briefcase in his right hand. He did not rush. He did not yell. He walked over to us with the calm, terrifying precision of an apex predator. Marcus gave me a brief, reassuring nod before turning his attention entirely to the Montgomerys. He did not match their aggressive, frantic energy. Instead, he simply unclasped his briefcase, pulled out a single neatly printed document, and handed it directly to Arthur. Arthur snatched the paper with a frustrated huff, aggressively adjusting his reading glasses. Eleanor leaned over his shoulder, her eyes scanning the document with deep aristocratic suspicion. "What is this garbage?" Arthur demanded, glaring at the complex diagram printed on the page. "That is a federal financial tracking flowchart," Marcus stated, his voice smooth and deadly quiet. "It took me less than an hour to subpoena the routing numbers stamped on the cash your grandson was hiding inside Maya's walls." Arthur and Eleanor froze. Their eyes locked onto the specific corporate entities and limited liability companies printed on the chart. "David did not just borrow money from a shadow lender," Marcus explained, stepping closer, forcing the grandparents to step back. "He used your pristine family trust as collateral to secure the loan. And Derek was not just hiding the physical cash. He was actively funneling the syndicate's dirty money through your private generational banking accounts to wash it clean. Your brilliant, innocent grandson turned your entire family estate into a massive offshore laundering hub." The color rapidly drained from Eleanor's face. The expensive crocodile bag slipped from her grip, hitting the linoleum floor with a heavy, unceremonious thud. Arthur's mouth opened and closed silently, his hands shaking violently as he stared at the undeniable proof of his family's impending financial ruin. "If Derek goes down for the cash hidden inside those walls," Marcus whispered, leaning in closer to deliver the final devastating blow, "the federal investigation will trace the wire fraud directly back to your accounts. The FBI will freeze your entire estate by tomorrow morning. You are not going to bail him out. You are going to be indicted right alongside him." 2 weeks later, the crisp, biting chill of Thanksgiving Day settled over the city. The federal investigation had moved with terrifying, relentless speed. Grand jury subpoenas had been issued, humiliating bail hearings had been arranged, and the Montgomery family's pristine social reputation was currently being dragged through the mud by every major news outlet. The FBI had successfully frozen their primary generational estate accounts exactly as Marcus had predicted. Yet despite the heavy GPS ankle monitors currently strapped to David and Derek's legs beneath their expensive trousers, they still believed they could manipulate their way out of a federal indictment. They had orchestrated a so-called truce dinner. The location was a private, highly exclusive dining suite inside a rented country club on the outskirts of the city. Neutral ground. I had received the invitation printed on heavy cream-colored cardstock, promising a peaceful resolution and a mutually beneficial settlement. I knew exactly what it was. It was a desperate coordinated trap. But I attended anyway, simply to watch them squirm in their own misery. When I walked into the private suite, the rich scent of roasted turkey, expensive sage stuffing, and spiced cranberry filled the air. The long mahogany table was set with flawless crystal goblets and polished silver cutlery. And there they were, the entire criminal enterprise, sitting together like a twisted, grotesque portrait of domestic bliss. Ashley immediately stood up, her face stretched into a painfully wide artificial smile. She smoothed down her pristine cashmere sweater, completely ignoring the fact that the last time I saw her, she was sobbing in drywall dust and lying about a fake pregnancy. "Maya, we are so incredibly thrilled you decided to join us," Ashley cooed, stepping forward to pour a heavy splash of expensive Pinot Noir into my crystal glass. "Thanksgiving is about family, about coming together and putting past grievances behind us. We really want to heal and move forward." David stood at the head of the table holding a silver carving knife and a heavy meat fork. He expertly sliced into the golden brown turkey, chuckling with an exaggerated jovial warmth that made my skin crawl. "We let tempers flare, Maya," David announced, placing a generous cut of white meat onto a porcelain plate. "Business pressures get the best of all of us. But at the end of the day, we are reasonable adults. There is no need for this to end in mutually assured destruction. We can handle this internally exactly the way families are supposed to." Across the table, Eleanor and Arthur Montgomery watched me like starving vultures pretending to be doves. Their aristocratic arrogance was severely dented by their recent booking photos, but they still clung to their elitist superiority. "We are prepared to be extraordinarily forgiving," Maya Eleanor stated, taking a delicate sip of her wine. "We recognize that you felt marginalized. You acted out of a misguided sense of betrayal. But we are a resourceful family. We protect our own, and we are willing to extend that protection back to you provided you show the proper loyalty." They acted as if the last month of absolute betrayal, wire fraud, and syndicate money laundering had never happened. They passed the mashed potatoes, complimented the floral centerpieces, and smiled with dead, predatory eyes. I sat quietly at my designated seat, my hands folded perfectly in my lap, watching their pathetic performance unfold. Once the plates were filled and the wine glasses were topped off, Arthur loudly cleared his throat. The fake smiles instantly vanished from their faces, replaced by hard, calculated greed. Arthur reached into his tailored suit jacket and pulled out a thick stack of stapled legal documents. He tossed them onto the center of the table. They slid across the pristine white linen and stopped directly in front of my plate. "Non-disclosure agreements and affidavits of retraction," Arthur stated, his voice dropping its friendly pretense and shifting into a harsh command. "You are going to sign them right now. You will officially state to the federal prosecutors that the video you recorded was altered. You will refuse to testify in front of the grand jury, and you will hand over all digital backups of the recordings." Derek leaned forward, sweat beading on his forehead, despite the cool room temperature. "If you do this, Maya, we will give you a settlement. $250,000. Clean, untraceable cash. It is more money than you deserve, and it is the absolutely only way you walk away from this without my grandparents tying you up in retaliatory lawsuits for the next 10 years. They were attempting to gang up on me using a meager financial settlement to buy their freedom. They truly believed that $250,000 would make me kneel. They thought their rapidly dwindling wealth could somehow erase federal evidence and overwrite their own recorded confessions. I looked down at the stack of legal papers. A heavy gold pen had been placed neatly on top of the signature line. The entire table watched me, holding their breath, waiting for me to pick up the pen and surrender to their extortion. I did not touch the pen. I did not even look at the settlement figure. Instead, I slowly pushed my chair back and stood up. The heavy wooden legs scraped loudly against the polished floor, breaking the tense silence of the room. I walked smoothly across the carpet, moving past David holding the carving knife and past Ashley clutching her wine glass. I reached the heavy, solid oak double doors of the private dining suite. I grasped the thick brass lock and turned it. A loud, heavy metallic click echoed through the silent room, sealing us inside. I turned back to face the table, leaning casually against the locked doors. I looked at their confused, suddenly terrified faces and let a cold, triumphant smile spread across my face. Nobody is eating today. The room erupted into absolute, unadulterated chaos. Ashley screamed, her hands flying to her mouth as her crystal wine glass tipped over, sending a dark red stain bleeding across the pristine white linen tablecloth. David lunged out of his chair, his face a mask of furious purple indignation, clutching the heavy carving fork as if he were considering using it as a weapon. Arthur slammed his fists against the mahogany table, demanding I unlock the doors immediately, while Eleanor gasped, clutching her pearls in a state of aristocratic shock. I ignored every single one of them. My high heels clicked sharply against the floorboards as I walked back to the head of the table. I reached down, gripped the edges of the massive silver platter holding the perfectly roasted Thanksgiving turkey, and unceremoniously lifted it into the air. With a casual flick of my wrists, I dumped the entire bird directly into the tall brass garbage bin standing near the service cart. The heavy, sickening thud of the meat hitting the bottom of the trash can silenced their shouting for a fraction of a second. "Are you out of your mind?" David bellowed, his chest heaving as he pointed a shaking finger at my face. "Unlock those doors right now, or I will call the police myself." "Please do, David," I replied, my voice ringing with a cold, terrifying clarity. "I highly encourage it." I continued my slow, methodical march around the long table. I grabbed Ashley's porcelain dinner plate, scraping her expensive sage stuffing and spiced cranberry sauce directly into the trash. I did the same to Arthur's plate, then Eleanor's, then Derek's. I systematically stripped the table of every single ounce of their holiday feast, leaving them staring at empty placemats. From the lower shelf of the service cart, I retrieved a stack of thick, heavy black binders. I walked back around the table, dropping one binder violently in front of David. The loud smack of the heavy plastic hitting the wood made him flinch. I dropped the second binder in front of Derek. The third binder, the thickest of them all, I dropped squarely between Arthur and Eleanor. "This is the real dinner," I announced, stepping back and folding my arms across my chest. "I suggest you open them and start digesting." Nobody moved. They stared at the black binders as if they were explosive devices. "Since you seem to have lost your appetites, I will read the menu for you." I continued my tone, shifting into the razor-sharp cadence of a senior forensic corporate auditor, delivering a fatal presentation. Inside those pages is a comprehensive, fully audited, perfectly documented report of your entire criminal network. I spent the last 14 days tracing every single digital footprint you arrogant fools left behind. Derek swallowed hard, his hands trembling as he reached out and slowly flipped open the cover of his binder. "Let us start with your fake cryptocurrency shell companies, Derek," I said, watching his eyes widen in absolute horror as he stared at the printed ledgers. "You claimed you were a digital asset pioneer. In reality, you were running a rudimentary layering scheme. You set up shell accounts in the Cayman Islands to accept the illicit syndicate cash, converted it into untraceable digital tokens, and then immediately transferred it back into fiat currency using proxy servers. But you are lazy, Derek. You used the exact same IP address from the guest bedroom of my house to access both the secure shell accounts and your personal streaming services. You linked your illicit digital wallets directly to the joint credit card ledger to pay the server hosting fees. It took me less than 3 hours to map your entire laundering cycle." Derek pushed his chair back, gasping for air as if the room had suddenly run out of oxygen. He looked like he was going to vomit. I turned my gaze to David, who was staring at his own binder with a sickening mix of dread and denial. And your contribution to this enterprise, David, is arguably the most pathetic. I stated ruthlessly. You took out a massive fraudulent equity line to cover your catastrophic margin calls. But traditional banks require collateral. Since you had already driven your own company into bankruptcy, you used a forged deed to put my property up as collateral for the shadow lenders. You created dummy corporations, faked the appraisal documents, and wired the initial loan payments through Derek's crypto shells to hide the origins. Every single forged document, every illegal wire transfer, and every desperate email you sent to your offshore loan sharks is printed and highlighted in tab 3 of your binder. David's hands gripped the edge of the mahogany table so tightly his knuckles turned entirely white. He refused to look at me, his eyes locked onto the undeniable proof of his own financial treason. Finally, I turned to the grandparents. Eleanor and Arthur were staring at their binder, their aristocratic composure completely demolished. Arthur's mouth opened and closed silently, unable to process the highly detailed spreadsheets exposing their decades of generational wealth. "And you two," I whispered, stepping closer to their end of the table. "You thought you were untouchable. You thought your pristine social standing made you invisible to federal oversight. But you allowed Derek to use your generational banking accounts to legitimize his washed funds. You knowingly accepted regular deposits of illegal syndicate cash and disguised them as trust fund dividends to evade offshore tax penalties. You facilitated a massive international tax evasion scheme to protect your grandson's money laundering operation. I tracked every single cent. I cross-referenced the wire transfer dates with your private flight logs. I pulled the public tax records of your charities and matched them against the incoming offshore deposits. Your entire family estate is built on federal tax fraud." The silence in the dining suite was absolute, heavy, and suffocating. The reality of my meticulous forensic audit crashed over them, crushing their arrogant delusions of a meager financial settlement. They were looking at decades in federal prison. Suddenly, David let out a harsh, desperate bark of laughter. He pushed his binder away, his face twisting into an ugly, triumphant sneer. He had found what he believed was a loophole, a tiny sliver of leverage to regain control. "You are bluffing, Maya," David sneered, pointing a meaty finger at me. "You think you can use this to blackmail us into dropping the house claim. But you cannot do anything with these files. You lived in the same house. You owned the network where the IP addresses were logged. If you submit these binders to the authorities, you go down right alongside us as an accessory. You are just as trapped as we are." I looked at David's smug, arrogant face. I did not blink. I did not break eye contact. Before I could utter a single word in response, a massive, thunderous pounding echoed behind me. The heavy double doors of the locked dining suite violently rattled in their hinges. "FBI," a booming, authoritative voice shouted from the hallway, carrying directly through the thick oak doors. "Open the doors immediately." I reached behind me and turned the heavy brass latch. I pulled the double doors inward and stepped aside. A swarm of federal agents flooded into the private dining suite. They moved with terrifying, practiced efficiency. Dark tactical gear, utility belts, and stern, unyielding expressions instantly overwhelmed the lavish, fragrant Thanksgiving spread. Radios crackled with sharp, clipped commands as the agents swiftly fanned out, securing every exit and corner of the mahogany-paneled room. Complete pandemonium broke out. The smug, untouchable facade of the Montgomery family shattered into a million irreparable pieces in a matter of seconds. Arthur stumbled backward, his heavy wooden chair tipping over and crashing onto the floor. He raised his hands defensively, his bespoke tweed suit suddenly looking like a cheap costume. Eleanor let out a piercing, undignified shriek, pressing herself against the far wall as an agent firmly instructed her to remain exactly where she was. But the true spectacle was not their fear. It was their immediate, utterly predictable betrayal of one another. The moment the handcuffs were unclipped from an agent's belt, the illusion of family loyalty evaporated. They became rats on a sinking ship, violently tearing each other apart to stay afloat. David was the first to break. The arrogant, posturing executive who had just offered me a $250,000 bribe completely unraveled. He threw his hands up his chest, heaving, and violently pointed across the table at his new wife. "It was her!" David screamed, his voice cracking in sheer panic. Ashley orchestrated the entire thing. She found the shadow lenders. She made me sign the equity documents. I did not want any part of this. She told me we needed the cash to maintain our lifestyle. She is the one you want. Ashley's jaw dropped in absolute horror. Her eyes darted wildly between the approaching federal agents and her husband. The loving, devoted partner act dissolved instantly. She lunged forward, nearly knocking over her chair, and pointed directly at Derek. "You lying coward!" Ashley shrieked, her voice echoing shrilly off the dining room walls. "You knew exactly what you were doing." And Derek forced my hand. He told me the crypto layering was completely foolproof. He said he had washed millions before and that we would never get caught. He manipulated the entire corporate structure. Derek, currently wearing a GPS ankle monitor that was blinking rapidly under the hem of his trousers, backed away from the table. His face was slick with terrified sweat. He looked at Ashley, then at the federal agents, and finally threw his own flesh and blood directly into the line of fire. He pointed shaking fingers at Arthur and Eleanor, who were watching their precious grandson with expressions of absolute devastation. "I only did the digital transfers." Derek cried out, his voice a pathetic, wavering whine. "They are the real criminals. My grandparents set up the offshore accounts 30 years ago. They taught me how to disguise the deposits as trust fund dividends. They have been evading federal taxes since before I was even born. I just used the system they built. They gave me the access codes. Arrest them." Eleanor gasped loudly, clutching her chest, as if she had been physically struck. Arthur glared at Derek with pure, venomous hatred, realizing that his golden child had just handed the FBI a vocal confession regarding their generational tax evasion. I stood silently near the doorway, watching the beautiful, chaotic destruction of the Montgomery enterprise. They had spent years hiding behind their wealth, using their social status to bully and manipulate everyone around them. Now faced with the cold reality of federal prison, they proved they had absolutely no loyalty, no honor, and no integrity. They were perfectly willing to sell each other out for a reduced sentence. An agent moved toward David, pulling a pair of heavy steel handcuffs from his belt. David backed into the edge of the dining table, his breathing ragged and shallow. He realized that pointing fingers at his family was not going to stop his arrest. His eyes darted around the room, desperate for a lifeline, until they landed on me. His face twisted into a mask of pure vindictive malice. He raised his arm, pointing his finger directly at my chest. He was going to try one final desperate move to drag me down into the ruins of his life. "Wait!" David yelled, his voice carrying loudly over the chaos of the room. "Do not just look at us. She is the mastermind." The room briefly quieted as the agent secured the perimeter. David seized the moment, desperately trying to spin a narrative that would implicate me in their massive fraud ring. "Look at those binders," David shouted, gesturing wildly toward the black folders sitting on the Thanksgiving table. "She has the ledgers. She lived in the house where the IP addresses were logged. She tracked the offshore accounts. She is a highly trained financial auditor. We do not know anything about accounting. She managed the books. She is the accountant for the entire syndicate. Arrest her. She is just as guilty as we are. You have to arrest her right now." I did not flinch. I did not step back. I stood perfectly still, maintaining my calm, composed posture. I watched David, panting, his eyes wide with a desperate, malicious hope that his lie would buy him time. The lead FBI agent, a tall, broad-shouldered man in a dark suit with a federal badge clipped to his belt, stepped fully into the room. He heard David's entire frantic accusation. He looked at David, his expression entirely unreadable. Then the lead agent completely ignored him. He bypassed the panicked, shouting family members. He walked past the ruined Thanksgiving feast and the spilled wine. He walked straight up to me, stopping just a few feet away. The room fell into a stunned, breathless silence as the Montgomery family watched, waiting for the agent to pull out handcuffs and place me under arrest. Instead, the lead FBI agent reached out and firmly extended his right hand. "Excellent work, ma'am," the agent stated, his voice calm and deeply respectful. We have everything we need. I took the agent's extended hand, giving it a firm professional shake. Thank you, Agent Miller, I replied, my voice steady and completely devoid of the panic currently choking the rest of the room. The audio transmitters are still active, and you will find the supplemental digital flash drives securely taped beneath the center leaf of this mahogany dining table. David's brain short-circuited. He stared at our linked hands, his mouth opening and closing like a suffocating fish. What transmitters, he gasped, his eyes darting frantically around the lavish wood-paneled dining suite. He looked at the floral centerpieces, the crystal chandeliers, and finally back to me, the color rapidly draining from his face. I turned to face my ex-husband, dropping the final curtain on his pathetic manufactured reality. I informed him that I had not spent the last 3 months acting out of blind vengeance, petty jealousy, or desperate emotion. I had been working as a highly classified, confidential federal informant. Every single day, every humiliating interaction, every time I allowed Ashley to sneer at me, and every time I let Derek brag about his impenetrable offshore accounts, I was wearing a wire. I was gathering actionable, undeniable, federally admissible intelligence for the Department of Justice. I watched the exact moment the devastating truth clicked behind Eleanor's terrified, aristocratic eyes. I explained to the table that Marcus was never just a high-powered defense attorney handling my property dispute. He was my official legal liaison with the federal government. He had negotiated my blanket immunity and cooperation agreements on day 1. Every supposed conflict, every trap I set, and every piece of bait I offered was strategically designed with strict federal oversight. I needed to force them into confessing on tape. I needed them to bring the physical evidence, the sequential cash in the drywall, the offshore server logs, the unredacted ledgers out into the light, so the authorities could seize it cleanly and legally. Agent Miller sharply signaled his tactical team. The harsh metallic ratcheting of heavy steel handcuffs cut through the stale, wine-scented air of the country club suite. The agents moved with absolute unforgiving precision, executing a flawlessly choreographed takedown. An agent secured Ashley's wrists violently behind her back. She immediately dissolved into high-pitched hysterical sobbing, her designer cashmere sweater snagging roughly on the agent's tactical vest. She wailed that she was innocent, that she was just a pawn, completely abandoning the fierce, entitled persona she had flaunted for months. Derek collapsed entirely to his knees on the expensive carpet. He openly wept, begging the agents for a plea deal, frantically offering to testify against his own grandparents, before an agent had even finished reading him his Miranda rights. 2 federal agents had to physically haul Arthur to his feet. His bespoke tweed suit wrinkled and bunched as they marched him aggressively toward the exit. He muttered incoherent threats about lawsuits, but his voice lacked any real power. Eleanor trailed behind him in a state of absolute shock. Her face was a mask of ruined aristocratic pride. She wept openly, her mascara running down her cheeks, as the cold, terrifying reality of a concrete federal holding cell finally shattered her elitist delusions. Their generational wealth could not buy them out of a coordinated federal sting. Then 2 towering agents grabbed David by his broad shoulders. They yanked his arms backward, securing the heavy cuffs tightly against his wrists. They shoved him forward, force marching him past the ruined Thanksgiving feast and the brass trash can holding the discarded turkey. As they dragged him toward the heavy oak doors, David dug the heels of his expensive Italian loafers into the thick carpet, forcing a momentary, desperate halt. He turned his head and looked back at me. His eyes were wide, bloodshot, and filled with the terrifying, absolute realization that he had been completely outplayed. He had treated me like an obedient, disposable maid. He had wildly underestimated my intelligence, mocked my ambition, and assumed I would simply fade into the silent background while he built his illicit criminal empire. He finally understood that I was never the victim in his story. I was the architect of his demise. I met his desperate, ruined gaze with absolute unbothered calm. I gave him a small, polite, dismissing wave. The agents shoved him forward again, dragging him roughly out of the dining suite and into the glaring, flashing red and blue lights of the armored transport vans waiting outside in the freezing night air. The chaotic scene eventually faded into a profound, beautiful silence. The next morning, the winter sun filtered brightly through the large, pristine windows of my beautifully renovated home. The property was entirely in my name. The deed was clean, the mortgage was secure, and the toxic infection that had previously occupied its halls was completely eradicated. I walked barefoot across the spotless, gleaming hardwood floors, enjoying the absolute uninterrupted peace of my own sanctuary. David, Derek, Ashley, and the grandparents were currently sitting in separate freezing federal holding cells, facing decades in a maximum security prison. They had lost their stolen wealth, their freedom, and their highly guarded elitist reputations. I moved smoothly into the kitchen and poured myself a fresh steaming cup of dark roast coffee. The rich, comforting aroma filled the quiet room. I walked into the living room and approached the grand stone fireplace. A warm, crackling fire was already burning brightly on the hearth, pushing away the winter chill. I reached into the pocket of my thick cardigan and pulled out a folded, crumpled piece of paper. It was the original demanding maid list that Ashley had shoved into my hands on the very first day she invaded my home. It was a pathetic relic of their arrogance, a physical reminder of exactly how severely they had miscalculated my worth.